Honestly.
Oh no! Now you're talking.
The golden era.
I mean, it'd be more newsworthy than the news.
Oh, much more, yeah.
Most of the time.
I used to watch the Generation Games as a documentary as a kid.
I mean, Natch.
The panorama of the
You've got
day.
about 10 seconds. What are you talking about?
How do we get ourselves out of this rut with the UK economy? Rachel can't do it, and neither can Keir.
Do you think Rachel stays in a job the whole of the...
No, she won't be there in half a year. She's already gone. She's penning the letter.
I mean, 6 months in, this is looking really bad.
It's not a good look, is it?
It's going to get worse. Enjoy. At least it's sunny out there, if Cole. Ian Collins up next. Big thanks to Claire Pearson. I'm Julia Holly, but you've been brilliant. Thanks, Sugar Puff. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And thank you to Julia. Yes, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Lots to get through. This afternoon, Keir Starmer failing to say if Rachel Reeves will still be the Chancellor at the next election as she continues to come under pressure over the state of the economy and public finances. There's so much to get through. By the way, what is the way out for the UK economy? We're all ears at this, and I'm sure you've got better ideas than they have down there at the Treasury, which seem slightly thin on the ground at the moment. Details to come. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is promising action to win the global race on AI, aiming to drive investment, jobs and growth with a pledge to add £50 billion to the UK economy on an annual basis. Good luck with that. He thinks he's ahead of the game of China and the United States and a plethora of other countries. We'll have more on that a little later. And NHS data reveals that more than 500,000 patients waited 12 hours or more on A&E trolleys last year. That's a 25% increase on those figures from 2022. It's a cracking start for Keir & Co, right? Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. We're going to talk to James Price in just a moment. Political commentator, a man who knows his way behind the scenes of Westminster for a gauge on the big stories of the day. By the way, the pound dropped again, lowest value against the dollar since November 2023, while government borrowing costs have continued to rise. We understand the Treasury ordering cabinet ministers to be ruthless in identifying where you can cut some wastage. I mean, we all know, we've all got our own hit list, our own wish list of things you would cut. All the things that most people, common sense would suggest that you would cut are the very things that are probably safe under this lot. So they want to prove their economic plan is working. Right, now I can pull that apart on the first stroke. What is the economic plan? Rach, we don't know. There's an internal letter going around, apparently, about Rachel Reeves' review, seen by one national newspaper admitting that difficult decisions on budgets will be needed. And this comes after a week of turmoil on the financial markets. Interest rate 30-year government bonds hitting the highest level since 1998. Ministers brace for more market upheaval over the course of this week. The Chancellor is now under pressure to find extra savings after the surge in the cost of government debt put her borrowing rules at risk of being broken. Look, Rach, if you tax people more, I don't know any economic plan of how you would grow the economy. I mean, I'm pretty sure you could read Das Kapital. I wouldn't find that piece of advice in there somewhere. Don't worry, China will save us. Hooray! China will save us. China committing to put £600 million into the UK as a start. I think the word as a start was added by our lot rather than their lot. This will lead to future investment, according to Peter Kyle. He's the Science Secretary, don't you know. He said the Chancellor had returned with solid commitments. So there you go. Don't worry about anything. China will save us. £600 million sounds an awful lot of money. You'd like to win it on the lottery. Of course you would. In governmental terms, in the grander scale of our economic purse, it is small fry. So I'm not sure China can do it. But don't worry. There's another plan. The government are doing to what the government are doing to the country to make us an AI-friendly nation, running all of our lives, saving us billions, a golden age of public sector reform, said Sakir this morning. So don't worry. We've got the Chinese, we've got the AI and the machines. They're going to fix everything from education to potholes, apparently. AI doesn't say exactly how that's going to happen, but when I see words like, we are going to win the global race on AI, mate, has nobody spoken to Keir Starmer? I mean, other countries are way... I mean, I can't even find the correct way to describe how far ahead other places are. And none more so than our old mate China, who's there as well. I was reminded about this point as well, when it comes to economics, that budget, where we're going now. The issue isn't raising the minimum wage or even higher national insurance. They can both work in the long term. The real problem is the UK's chronically poor productivity. There's a widening north-south productivity gap. Cheap labour has become a crutch, masking the core issue instead of addressing it. The silver lining, higher wages can force businesses to confront this. What the government has failed to do, however, was pair higher wages with incentives for productivity and improvements. Remember all those union negotiations? They'll give you some more money. What do we got to do? Nothing, really. What, no more product? No. No serious tax breaks for automation or upskilling. No real push for innovation hubs in the north. No reward for businesses investing in efficiency. Without these measures, we risk higher costs without the growth needed to sustain them. And that's why we are seeing the market in turmoil. So what is the way out for the UK? In layman's terms, maybe you can answer that for us. 0344 499 1000. And let's get a word from James Price, political commentator on all of this. James, afternoon to you.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good as gold at this end. Look, I know when you're in government and you're having all of these, meetings in the, whether it's in the Treasury or Number 10, wherever it happens to be, all the pictures that we describe and how we talk about this, it all looks very different, right? You're probably sitting there going, well, there's not really a crisis. I mean, there's a bit of wobble, but there's meant to be wobbled. I don't know what they're talking about. But, every now and again, the perception has a habit of taking over whatever the reality might be. And, of course, if there's a perception the economy has the wobbles, and I think there's demonstrable proof that it does, then that has a habit of becoming the reality. And, of course, the last thing the markets need is a lack of confidence.
Yeah, I think you've put it perfectly there, that idea that perception can become reality. And that's why we've seen from the Labour government for a long time, they were talking down the economy, saying how terrible and gloomy and awful everything was going to be for a long time. Well, if you're a business person looking at the government of the day saying that, are you going to go and put your hard-earned cash into that country? Perhaps not. And this is, I suppose, one of the problems you've got from the fact that Rachel Reeves pretended to be an economist and made a big song and dance about being an economist. And it turns out that that wasn't entirely strictly true, was it? Where did she work? In the complaints department of the bank instead? And maybe doesn't have the firmest grasp of these sorts of things. And not just her, but I don't think anybody really has any proper private sector experience around that entire cabinet table. And it's a big problem.
Yeah.
If you don't understand how these various very complicated worlds of finance and all these things work, and worse than that, if you can't get into the mindset of either somebody who's looking at a government asking to borrow money, or even, more importantly, perhaps a small business owner who knows what it's going to take to make ends meet at the end of the day. You've got no experience of any of that, no real skin in the game in any of those worlds, except that because you're a socialist, you think they're both equally evil and terrible. Well, is it any surprise you don't understand how the real world works? And I think that's the problem we've got now.
And you're absolutely right. If you look at that front bench and you think, my goodness, I cannot see a scintilla of experience among these people, and they are literally running the place. And of course, Rachel Reeves went to China tail end of last week. Rightly or wrongly, she went to China. She's come back with apparently £600 million, which I'm almost sure if we dug deep enough, we'd discover that was already in the pipeline anyway. And that's, one part of it. Today, Keir Starmer says AI could be our saviour. I mean, what is the way out for our economy?
Well, I don't think the way out for the economy is going to China with a begging bowl in hand. I mean, I think that's absolutely ludicrous. Not only is 600 million quid, that's less than 7% of the amount of money we've apparently agreed to give to Mauritius in order to also give them some of our territory, which is itself just, mind-bogglingly stupid, talking about a war on waste. And yet, because Keir Starmer doesn't want to lose face to his lefty lawyer mates who are advising the Mauritian government, we're going to be giving away billions and billions of pounds, along with some of our crucial territory in the Indian Ocean, where you've got this Diego Garcia base that we and the Americans use to try and keep the world free and safe. There's one idea there. And of course, China itself, over the coming years, is going to get more and more authoritarian. It's going to steal more technology from the West because it's not allowed to innovate itself. It's going to clamp down even further on its own people. We're going to discover more atrocities, like the forced sterilization of 1 million Uyghur Muslims in the west of China. And so we've got to do business with these people because they're a big power. It will look increasingly like the kind of appeasement that the West did towards Germany in the 1930s. And where you don't need to do that, because you can look across the Atlantic and see an example of what a healthy, thriving economy looks like. Donald Trump, for all the people might not like him in various ways, made sure that the American economy was doing absolute gangbusters in his first term. They did that, by the way, by just getting out of the way and getting regulation out of the way. Yep. And Americans are now about 60% richer than the average Brits are. And their poorest state, Mississippi, wealthier than the average Brit if you're in Mississippi. It's absolutely extraordinary numbers. So let's go and do a free trade deal with them. Let's copy that American model, which is getting regulators out of the way, letting business people have the tools they need to get on with things and not taxing them into oblivion. It ain't that hard.
Indeed. Well, you'd think it would be straightforward, but clearly that memo didn't reach the Treasury or Number 10. It's interesting, by the way, that today, I mean, look how Keir Starmer has talked about Rachel Reeves being this amazing person, and she's clearly the before the election, she's the person to become the Chancellor to save the economy from the wicked Tory. Very, very sure that he had the right person in situ, speaking very highly of her. But does that endorsement still stand? Let's have a listen to what he said today.
Will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this Parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence. She has the full confidence of the entire party.
Now, when you hear that, James, it's very I mean, it's not unreasonable, is it, to say, why didn't he just say yes?
Well, quite. I mean, presumably because he's not planning on keeping her there the whole time. When similar concerns were raised about the hapless Foreign Secretary David Lammy, again, this is the guy whose bright idea it is to give away sovereign British territory to a state who's no friend of ours, and, by the way, give them billions of pounds of your taxpayer money.
Yep.
And he was asked a similar question. The number 10 confirmed that David Lammy would remain as Foreign Secretary for the entire length of the Parliament, which is itself, by the way, a scary thought on its own. But if they've made that commitment for Lammy and they've not made it for Rachel Reeves, what signal does that send to the markets? I suppose the one benefit of that means that we're not going to get David Lammy as Chancellor, who would definitely be even worse.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, even if you take Rachel Reeves out of the equation, who the heck do you put in there? You know, that makes it perhaps even more worrying. We'll be saying bring back Rach at some point. That's how bad things are. Let's move to that big speech this morning from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, saying artificial intelligence will turbocharge growth. He's trying to revive the economy and revive confidence as well. Let's have a listen to what the Prime Minister said.
AI isn't something sort of the future over the next hill. It's the present. It's already here, in Britain, changing lives. A chance to turbocharge growth, create the companies of the future, and radically improve our public services.
Sort of sounds, it's said with the conviction of how your old granddad might describe it. You know, this AI thing coming round here, changing things, it's going to be amazing. You know, I didn't get the impression this was a fella that is fully on board with the very speech he was giving. And the idea as well, James, that, you know, somehow we're going to be the global leader on this is, frankly, for the fairies.
Well, I mean, it does sound a little bit like this was a speech written by a very low-rent artificial intelligence, doesn't it?
Yes.
I do worry that there are some people in Westminster who can't even spell AI. I'm a bit more bullish on the UK's outlook in general on this, though. The guy who wrote this plan for the government that it's accepting is a guy called Matt Clifford, who is an extremely smart, capable, talented guy, because the United Kingdom is full still of extremely smart, talented, capable people. We're losing far too many of them to other jurisdictions, whether it's the UAE with its no tax, America with its sort of dynamic get up and go vision, or other places. And so that's a big problem. But when you've got people like Matt Clifford writing these kinds of plans, we should listen to it. But the problem you've got is that inherent in this idea of making us the world leaders in AI and all these things means you've got to tackle all of the same kinds of structural problems that have been hurting the rest of the economy for too long. So in order to make AI work really well, you need huge amounts of energy. You need huge amounts of this. This is why people like Mark Zuckerberg are getting into the nuclear reactor business, because they know that they need things like nuclear, which is, by the way, I think probably the best form of energy that we should be really massively investing in the UK. You need that in order to do the kind of big computational number crunching to make these systems work. But we've got the most expensive energy in the G7, some of the most expensive energy costs in the world, because you've got mad ideologues like Red Ed Miliband coming along and banning it and shutting things down, and this ludicrous push to net zero that doesn't help the world. It just pushes those costs elsewhere. So unless you're going to deal with those sorts of issues and planning issues as well, where are you going to put these big data centers and things like that? Because someone will come along and complain that it will get in the way of the lesser spotted newt in some field or something like that. The same problem that affects the rest of the economy. So unless you're going to say, look, we need to make AI the #1 priority for the future of humanity and blah, 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 which is, you know, all very smart things we could talk about, you're going to use that as a battering ram to batter through the idea that energy is going to continue being this expensive. We're going to batter through the idea that we can't ever build anything anymore, and batter down the idea of high taxes and low wages, because you're not going to get the rest of the talented people sticking around in the UK to build these things unless you let them keep some of the money they themselves earn.
Yeah, spot on. We're going to talk some more, James, in a few moments. More stories still to come today, including 500,000 people laying on hospital trolleys in A&E. It's the 21st century in the UK. And back to net zero and Labour's push. Handing power to Beijing is the suggestion. More of that on the way. And that question. What is the way out for the UK economy? If you look at, often, you know, being an armchair general, and we all have a bit of that, if I was in charge, I would do this. So what would you do to just immediately see the United Kingdom come out of the doldrums? You know, we're not quite in a recession, but we're heading in a pretty bleak direction. 0344 499 1000, coming up on 1:20. This is Talk.
Things are going on, we know it, we're not allowed to talk about it, the authorities won't let you. That is what is so corrosive to the kind of social capital that generates this stuff in the first place. We have to be honest. Of course, you know, we shouldn't engage in kind of, you know, a sort of aggressive language against minority communities
not,
here.
yeah.
Most people in the Pakistani community are not abusing their children, and we shouldn't drift into that. At the same time, there is an issue.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This from Rob, who says, not much has been said about the Labour-run Welsh government, who, with all their concerns of cost-cutting, have increased their numbers by a third. The additional cost of these additional snouts in the trough, along with their hangers-on, is absolutely huge. How has this been allowed to happen? I think we took a call, didn't we, a couple of months before Christmas, from somebody who'd been down there to watch this sort of expansion programme, which didn't get a lot of coverage, but absolutely spot on. They know how to spend money, particularly when it's other people's, because remember, they only have other people's money. They don't have any money, just our money. We also have James Price with us, which is always a boon on a Monday afternoon. And let's get to it, James. I mean, it continues. The misery finds its feelers into all sorts of areas. The National Health Service was already suffering some severe turbulence, and it's not getting better anytime soon. A study has found that 500,000 Brits were left on A&E trolleys for 12 hours or more last year. Wes Streeting was going to sort this out with his big, shiny new plan. Let's have a listen to what the Health Secretary had to say.
The NHS is going through what is objectively the worst crisis in its history. And whether it's people struggling to get access to their GP, dialling 999 and an ambulance not arriving in time, turning up to A&E departments, waiting far too long, sometimes on trolleys in corridors, all going through the ordeal of knowing that you're waiting for a diagnosis that could be the difference between life and death.
So he's the man to save it, James. Do we have, or should we have, faith in Mr. Streeting? And are we likely to see fewer people waiting in A&E over the next year?
I do think that, to try and give some credit, that Wes Streeting, who I've never met, seems to be the most kind of competent and impressive and driven member of the Labour cabinet, which is perhaps damning with faint praise. But yes, I do think at least that he is an ambitious enough guy to realise that he's been handed this very, very difficult brief, knows the NHS is in a real pickle, and it's probably because he's on the left, able to slay some sacred cows and tell some dark home truths that the Conservatives have always been too scared to do. These ideas that it's the worst time ever for the NHS, you can go back through the entire history of the NHS since it was founded in the late 1940s, and all the time you're hearing about crises. And the reason for that is not that the Tories have strangled it of money, far from it. Actually, after the Brexit vote, the Tories did end up giving even more extra money to the NHS than that big red Brexit bus promised. They just didn't get any fanfare for it at all because people didn't believe it. It's not about money so much as the system itself. Yeah. And you get criticised endlessly for daring to say anything wrong about the NHS. But when you criticise it, I'm not talking about the doctors, I'm not criticising the nurses, I'm not even criticising the people whose job it is to go around and trying to allocate various rooms to people who are waiting on those beds. The system itself is a fundamentally not good system. You know, the Canadians do something a bit similar to us, but other than that, no other developed country has anything that looks like the NHS. Let's go and have a look, as so many lefties want to do, to what happens in Europe, who, for all their many other faults, do have more sensible healthcare systems than us. You know, you don't end up dying because you can't afford to pay for it or any of these sorts of scary stories, but you do find systems that work better. And a lot of that is, it has to be said, private sector involvement at a higher level, because if you can make money out of something, you deliver a better quality service. And we are comfortable with that when it comes to food. We're comfortable when it comes to that with cars, and how amazing things like that are. We seem to be too squeamish because of, I think, scaremongering to do that when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah, spot on. And of course, the irredeemable reality, though, James, is that even if we did have a new system, we've still desperately short of clinicians, and that's another issue here, isn't it? You can throw as much money in or change the way it functions, but unless we've got the people at the coalface, nothing much is going to change.
Yeah, it's a great point. But, I didn't realise this until quite recently, that we put an artificial cap on the number of British medical students that we allow every year.
Yeah, I don't know why that. Why is that?
I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? I think it's something to do with the kind of the trade unions involved in all of it, the kind of junior doctors' unions and things like that, to kind of artificially keep the numbers down so they've got higher bargaining power and things like that. But what ends up happening is that the ones that you do train up end up not being probably paid enough, I would say. The junior doctors have got something in there. You work hard, you should be able to be paid more. But I think, of course, everybody in the UK is paid far too little. The kind of money that, counts as a decent salary here would almost get you food stamps in the United States right now. But we also end up then importing loads of foreign doctors in because we've not trained up enough of our own. And then British doctors who do go through the system, they do a couple of years in the NHS, and then they get nabbed by the Australian healthcare system that promises them much more money and nicer sunshine. It's a completely ludicrous system. And it's the state getting in the way of this.
Let's finish on I was about to say a more light-hearted note, or it could equally be disturbing. Some research into tasks, basic DIY tasks that Gen Zers won't do. So it was Halfords, our friends over there in the kind of, once upon a time just cars and bikes department, have revealed that Gen Zers adults spend £1,300 annually on professionals for basic tasks, compared to £386 of Gen Xers. 1 in 5 Gen Z adults cannot identify a spanner. I mean, who doesn't know what a spanner is, for God's sake? 30% cannot recognise a flathead screwdriver. Nearly a quarter of Gen Zers avoid changing light bulbs, citing health and safety of a ladder. Over 65% of 18 to 27-year-olds do not know how to fit wiper blades, and 34% cannot identify a car battery. What the heck are we doing here, James?
It would be rude and crude of me to suggest that if they don't know what a spanner looks like, they could look around the cabinet table, wouldn't it? That would be too mean of me.
Yeah.
But I think that I'm slightly torn. But you have got apps now that will allow professionals to come and do these tasks better than you could yourself, and so there's a market there, and that's just allocating people with skills to people who require those skills. That's very efficient. It leaves you more time to get on with coding AI or whatever it may be in the modern world today, or sadly more likely playing on TikTok. So that's good in that sense. But the other problem with it is probably the fact that it's so much more difficult to get on the property market now. You see those nice pictures behind me. They're not hammered into the wall with an old-fashioned nail and a hammer. They've got those sort of weird sticky things on them. That means that you can peel them off without damaging the paint, because people don't own their own homes and therefore aren't allowed to decorate in the way that they want, and they're perhaps too scared to do DIY because the landlord might go and shout at them and put their rents up even more. So there's probably the structural reason behind it to try and give the poor Gen Zs a break. But the light bulb thing is completely ludicrous. Not a very bright idea.
What are you like, James, in the DIY department?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good when it comes to IKEA furniture.
I love it. I would do that for a living if I had to. Putting up IKEA furniture.
You could do. You've got a big market of all the Gen Zers or the Gen Zers who want it. The one thing I won't touch is plumbing. A lesson learned from my old man, that don't mess around with plumbing.
Don't mess around with the plumbing.
There could be disastrous.
Or electrics, and certainly not at the same time, because that can really be a recipe for disaster. Brilliant. James, thank you as ever. James Price, political commentator. I mean, my takeaway line from that, what Gen Zers won't do, is that 1 in 5 can't identify a spanner. I mean, how can you not know what a spanner is, your spanner? I mean, you'd have to... Where would you have to be? It's like saying you can't recognise a dog, right? I mean, it's a flipping spanner. You don't need to be good with the spanner to identify the spanner. You don't have to be brilliant at DIY to know what a spanner is, like knowing what a hammer is, right? Isn't it in the same ballpark? Amy, do you know what a spanner is? See, Amy knows what a spanner is. And she's a girl. So there you go. I'm jesting, Ofcom fans. Adam, do you know what a spanner is? Adam knows what a spanner is, and he's Australian. So, look, we're covering all bases here. Finn, do you know what a spanner is? No, he doesn't know. But then he is a moron. So there you go. 0344 499 1000. We'll take some calls on that as well, particularly if you've got kids that have now left home. And how often do you have to go around there and do their little bit of DIY as well? Because they just can't kind of... I mean, I give it a go. I quite enjoy it. And the IKEA thing, if you have to put a bit of IKEA furniture up, then that to me, I could spend an afternoon doing that. That's therapy, man. I mean, that's a really nice way to spend time. There are some tricky ones. It's the Rubik's Cube of the DIY world. 0344 499 1000. More important matters are on the table, of course. What is the way out for the UK economy? How would you define that? Is there a way? Is there something that our political masters are massively missing? We're going to speak to Vince Cable in a moment. He's a former business secretary. What's his view on this Chinese thing? I wonder, did he ever go to China when he was business secretary? He was there for 5 years in that job. We'll find out in a few moments. And the much-respected Patrick Minford, Professor of Applied Economics, is going to be joining us as well. Details on the way. Over to you as well. Just gone 1:30. This is Talk.
mayhem for business. So my advice to them would be, do a U-turn here, get business back on side, and promise them cooperation. Get rid of these stupid taxes which raise no revenue anyway, inheritance tax, capital gains tax. They raise absolutely nothing according to the Office of Budget Responsibility. And so, why do it? It's mad.
Am I right in saying, Patrick, that you actually were one of those that supported the Liz Truss route when it came to what we should do economically, a plan that she says never got a chance to get off the ground, and the markets were only spooked because commentators started talking about it in such negative ways, but actually underpinning it all was a sensible, prudent fiscal plan. Is that true?
Yes, it's true. There was a growth agenda there, and that's at the heart of it all. I mean, the markets are terrified because they see no growth, and so they think there'll be no revenue. And so they just think it's a sort of doom loop, no revenue, higher taxes, less growth, less revenue, less confidence, less chance of the government paying its debts. So the Truss agenda was actually in the right direction. It was saying growth comes first, and then that will mean that we'll have the money to pay for all the things we got to pay for. So that was the way forward. And it was a tragedy, really, that everybody combined, on the left-wing media and all the rest of them all combined to try and shoot it all down. And then, of course, the party itself lost its nerve. So it was all a terrible tragedy.
It would be argued, of course, that the reason that they lost their nerve was because the markets responded and said, look, this is crazy stuff. We've got interest rates going through the roof. I know they were already sort of going northwards anyway, and that was what was wrong. The reality was it couldn't work, even if notionally you quite like the idea of it working.
Well, it could have worked. The problem was we had a thoroughgoing crisis with the pension funds because of Bank of England poor supervision and regulation of the funds, and related regulators pushing them to hold more and more gilts instead of equities. And that was the problem. So that crisis of the pension funds exploded at the same time. And the bank really sat on its hands. It kind of didn't do what it should have done, which is to support the government in the markets. Had it done so, we'd have got through that very bumpy episode and rates would have then come down. It was a tragedy, really, that the whole of the civil service and the kind of Mandarin class really opposed the program and undermined it. It was a tragedy.
And just finally, Patrick, I mean, we're asking the question here today, what is the way out of the UK economy? There's a couple of things have been happening. Rachel Reeves went to China, of course. She's talking about £600 million of investment, which, of course, sounds like an awful lot of money. You wouldn't mind winning that on a Saturday afternoon at the races. But in the grander scale, that isn't a huge amount. So that's one area that is either exciting people or disappointing them, depending on where you sit on China. Then we've got the AI thing with Keir Starmer today. He's talking about us being a sort of world leader in the AI department, although some suggesting that boat has already begun to sail long ago, so we've got to play catch-up. Is there anything you can see this government could do in order to get us out? I mean, you mentioned the taxation. What is your perception then of the next 6 months to 12 months based on the current trajectory where we're likely to be?
Well, I'm very gloomy because Labour has pinned its colours to this terrible budget which has hammered business, and that's a tragedy. So I think the first thing it's got to do is to start making nice with business, and saying, look, we're going to reverse engines on this. We're going to make sure you're on side and help us to produce growth. Until they do that, I feel very gloomy about the prospects. That's the fundamental problem.
Patrick, thank you for your time, sir. Really appreciate that. Patrick Minford, Professor of Applied Economics, Cardiff Business School. I think a man who Mrs. Thatcher often looked at as a fellow that had some good fiscal thinking. Let's speak with Vince Cable, former business secretary. Vince, good afternoon to you. I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I would imagine you probably disagree with almost everything you just heard Patrick Minford say.
No, I partly agree with it. But certainly the budget didn't help business confidence, and business confidence is crucial, and we need business investment. So, but the origins of that problem were before the last general election, where the Labour Party promised not to raise basic taxes on income, value-added tax. So they could have gone to the country and said, we've got a fiscal problem, everybody's going to have to contribute, but they didn't. They tied their own hands, and we were left with these rather damaging, business-unfriendly taxes. To that extent, I agree with Patrick Minford, but the problems are much deeper and longer. I mean, we've been stuck in this low-growth trap for forever. I mean, I've been engaged in public debates for 60 years, and it was, why isn't Britain doing better? Certainly since the financial crisis, we've had a succession of shocks. We had the financial crisis itself, we had Brexit, we had the Ukraine war, we've had COVID, all of which have damaged the economy and piled up debt. And it's a very serious problem for any government. But I would start by agreeing with Patrick that you need a growth process. We had one in the coalition. We had a combination of fiscal discipline and growth-promoting industrial strategy and deregulation, and we're making real headway.
Do you sense, I mentioned China as business secretary. Did you go to China when you were business secretary? Was that an area that you had to explore yourself?
Yes, I did. I went 3 times. I went to India 4 times, Brazil twice, because the government took the view that although our main trading area was the European Union, we should be looking long-term to the big emerging markets, and China and India are top of that list. So we had to build relationships there. I think it still remains a powerful case for doing that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say on that point, is Rachel Reeves doing the right thing? Because there's naturally, as China... there's an argument that says their star is yet to fully rise in terms of dominance, second biggest economy. Some suggesting it could be the first. We'll have no choice but to suck up to China, get closer. And of course, that brings with it some ethical questions as well. But is it inevitable that China will be the area where we have to go almost cap in hand?
Well, we shouldn't go a cup in hand, but we should recognise the fact that we now have 2 superpowers, roughly comparable economic importance, you can argue, to the cows come home about which is bigger and which is smaller. The United States is currently in a pretty dynamic state. China's had serious economic problems the last couple of years that may persist. But in the long run, China will be a major economic player. It has been already. It's helped to drive the world economy after the financial crisis, and we need to hedge our relationships. We need to have much closer relations with the European Union, but with the emerging market, and of course the United States. And in all of these cases, we may be dealing with people we don't like very much, but you have to work with them. Britain is in a position to demand that they change their political system to fit ours.
Do you think one of the problems is we don't quite know kind of who we are in the business, on the business economic stage? We were once a big manufacturing base. We had mining, we had all sorts of cotton mills, car manufacturing. Of course, late 70s, throughout the 80s, we became the start of a service providing kind of country, and we can argue, the good or the bad in all of that. And now we're kind of in a bit of a no man's land, aren't we? Who are we economically? When the world looks at the UK, what are they seeing? What are they looking at?
Well, I think your analysis is spot on. I think a lot of countries feel Britain's a bit adrift, where we've left the European Union, but we haven't got any alternative arrangement. But I don't think we should talk the country down too much. There are lots of strengths. You mentioned services. Britain is actually one of the leading services exporters in the world. We do very well, not just in finance, but creative industries. The universities are major exporters by bringing in overseas students. There are lots of strengths to the British economy, not least, English language, right time zone, openness to business, openness to foreign investment. These are all positive things. And although we have serious problems, there are good things in the UK, and we should trumpet them.
And just a very final point, Vince, 6 months down the line, where do you see the economy? It's having more than a bit of a wobble at the moment. Can Rachel Reeves rescue it?
Well, she can't rescue it single-handedly, but there is a global problem. Bond yields are rising almost everywhere. Some countries are being really hammered very badly. Brazil, Mexico, Canada, they're in a worse position than the UK. But the UK is exposed. You know, in a sense, we're in the same sort of position as Italy, but Italy has the Eurozone behind it and we don't. So we are vulnerable and we are dependent on the kindness of strangers, the people who lend us money. So the government has to be very careful. It probably will involve breaking one of their two pledges. They will have to raise taxes of some kind, probably. And they may have to relax their fiscal rules, particularly this idea of reducing debt to GNP over 5 years. They've dug themselves into very rigid positions that a sensible government would be more flexible about.
Vince Cable, thank you. Former business secretary with the coalition government, 2010, 2015. We remember it well. The heady days of the seems incredible we had a coalition, doesn't it, for all that time? That's his take on it. You heard Mr Minford's take as well. Your response, 0344 499 1000. What is the way out for the UK economy? You want to throw some advice in Rachel Reeves' lug holes? What form would that take? What would that look like? We'll have more of your calls and responses in just a couple of moments. Just gone 1:45. This is Talk.
We are heading towards stagflation, where inflation is persistently higher than the Bank of England wants, and yet we've got no growth. And this is all because of the disastrous blunder budget. I mean, the truth is that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, they have crashed the economy.
They have.
I mean,
no question.
They have made the Liz Truss quasi-Kwarteng budget literally look like a walk in the park, a breeze compared to what is going on at the moment.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
One here says the £22 billion hole in the ground carbon capture, $8 billion for energy companies that will produce no energy, $12 billion for overseas climate aid and farmers, $8 billion sovereign wealth fund to give away to investors. None of this is needed expenditure and can save us 50 billion quid. So we don't need to add tax to the equation. Yeah, just box a little clever. This one from James in Cardiff. When Labour took power, they stopped funding of AI work being done by Edinburgh University, which meant we have no national computer capability for AI training for UK companies. What has changed apart from short-term thinking, says James? The only thing I can think has changed, a couple of things have changed, actually. One is that the Prime Minister and the government are absolutely desperate to look as if they have the handle on something. And when things are falling apart at the seams, as they really seem to be, in so many areas, but none more so than the economy itself, you've got to find something that sounds as if you're in control. So let's do the AI announcement. Of course, what has changed significantly since last July is that Keir Starmer no longer looks like the new kid on the block. He doesn't look like, OK, let's give this fella a chance. Maybe he's got some good... Had he announced the AI thing on day 3 of becoming Prime Minister, that whole speech would have looked completely different. Now it looks rather desperate, and you cannot, and this is the danger for this government, and particularly for the likes of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, is that if you're starting to look out of control and out of your depth, then, like it or not, that is absolutely the projection that we apply when we watch a Keir Starmer speech. He didn't look like a confident man with a plan. He looked like a fella who was reading a spad's words from a script. Let's go to Jackie in Oldham. Jackie, how you doing?
Not so bad, Ian. Not
Good.
So bad.
Nice to have you with us.
Few days after a hip replacement.
Oh, wow. How's it going? Are you up there? Are you out running at the moment?
Oh, yeah. I've just signed up for the next marathon.
I thought you were, yeah. You were doing the park run, weren't you, over there in Oldham? Well, I hope it's getting better and doing what it's meant to be doing. What is your take, then, on our economy, Jackie, and what's going on?
I don't know how many times people have to say this, Ian, but you cannot achieve growth with net zero. Yeah. You cannot put the world's most expensive energy bills onto business, which means they cannot be competitive with other businesses across the world. You can't do it. And until we reverse that, we're not going to go anywhere. Yeah. And as for AI take a monumental amount of energy. We were threatened with power cuts last week. So for Keir Starmer to stand up and say, oh, we're going to be the leading power, in AI, it is for the birds. We've got to do something radical, and I've got a radical idea that we have, our total income is about $3.5 trillion. The public sector pensions are more or less equivalent to that. If we cut 5% of public sector pensions, and I have one, if we cut 5% off that, we could unclip the wings of business and start this country growing, because we're not going to get the investment, because we're not looking as, with the budget and the fiscal policies, we're not looking as a sure thing. And we've got to do something radical to get this country going. Get rid of the net zero, start drilling, and also start cutting back on things that are that if this public sector pension debt gets any bigger, we'll be bankrupt.
It's not looking good, is it? And can they resuscitate it? Maybe, Jackie, that involves a change of personnel over there at the Treasury. I think watch this space is the line of the day. Jackie, thank you. Anthony is in Surrey. Rachel Reeves, can she turn it around? And if you think she can't, Anthony, what is the way out for the economy?
Yes, you've anticipated what I was going to say, and good afternoon and Happy New Year, by the way.
You too.
that I think Reeves is essentially toast, and she might cling on like Gavin Williamson. You remember him? Chris Grayling. One of those ones that just clings on by the fingernails, are totally useless at the start, always were, and they get another job on top of that. But never mind. Your previous caller said about what do we do to save the economy. Well, one of the things that hasn't gone up for a while is VAT. I hate to sort of whisper it to you.
Yeah.
And I know, I think this was something that kept essentially Boris afloat and May afloat before the income they did get from VAT. They, for all you think about Boris and May and what have you, they did relatively well with the income coming into the Treasury.
What about that? This every now and again. I was talking to somebody about this last week, actually. Every once in a while, Anthony, somebody says, why don't you just take the very richest 1% and put an extra 1% tax on earnings over £300,000? And then somebody crunches the numbers and says, that will solve all of our problems.
Oh, no, it doesn't work that way, does it? That's too simplistic. No,
well, it is too simple, but you often hear it said. A lot of people on the left say, all you got to do is just tax the very richest over a certain amount, so they wouldn't even pay extra on under 300,000. So those, if you're on 5 million a year, are you going to notice 1%?
Yeah, well, they're not going to stay here, are they? They're not going to bother to invest in Britain, after we're sucking up to goodness knows who, Trump and Musk and what have you.
True.
But I think we need a massive U-turn from the government on this current strategy. Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, if we're going to have a recession, we're going to. Probably Sunak foresaw that. We haven't had a crash for a long time. Suddenly, I think we are due one. And in some respects, we need it. A clean out to the stock market.
A clean out. Anthony, thank you. Anthony in Surrey. Lots of comment on this. Christopher says, ask Vince Cable if he's gotten over being tricked by Osborne and his best man over the post office debacle. And has he forgiven them? It's a fair point. On that issue of DIY, Kaz says, Gen Zers can't identify what a spanner is. Look at number 10. There's a whole toolbox in there. It's a fair point as well. Jules, won't AI make our economy weaker? AI supposedly makes things more efficient by removing the human from the process, therefore making the human redundant and therefore requiring welfare, requiring increased taxation to pay for them. How is that turbocharging growth? Well, that is the reality. As I've always heard it about AI, there will be some things that make areas of life more efficient. There might be some areas of bureaucracy that you can get AI to do it, and that's good. They even talk about in the legal world that AI can make legal decisions. And that algorithm, if that's the way to look at it, will get better and better. Well, that straight away, that's going to put lawyers out of work. Anyone that knows their beans around AI will tell you that ultimately, might not happen straight away, but ultimately when it's really got its claws into all areas of life, you don't create jobs out of it, you actually reduce them. Thoughts on that as well? 0344 499 1000. We're throwing out that question. What is the way out for the UK economy? It ain't China, it ain't AI, and it certainly ain't Rachel Reeves. What is the answer? More to come. News at 2 coming next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Lots going on this afternoon. Keir Starmer failing to say if Rachel Reeves will be Chancellor at the next general election. That's not a good look, right, as she continues to come under pressure over the state of the economy and public finances. What is the way out of the current mess? We'll have more response on that. Meanwhile, the PM's been promising action to win the global race on artificial intelligence, aiming to drive investment, jobs and growth, with a pledge to add 50 billion quid to the UK economy on an annual basis. I mean, that is a huge, if it's an aspiration, round of applause all round. A pledge, not a promise? Where's the difference there? And an inquiry into police failings during the Rotherham grooming gang scandal claims senior officers were not investigated, with only lower-ranking staff held accountable. This is one of the reasons why we need an inquiry. We'll have details on all of that to come. And, of course, anything from you as well. 0344 499 1000. If you're new to the home of common sense, welcome along. The way it works, if you hear anything along the way, something in the news, an area that you feel strongly about, get on the phone, give us a shout. We'll have a chinwag and chew the fat on whatever issue it happens to be. On a lighter note, it's always great when we've got a sort of a lighter parallel subject. We're talking about Gen Zers not being great at DIY. This was a Halford survey. Brian says the definition of comedy gold is watching my 25-year-old son and his girlfriend trying to build a freestanding 3-shelf unit from B&M. Mind you, I got a bit bored after their third attempt and it was still upside down even then, says Brian in Belfast. I love that. I love the idea that Brian sort of sat back just watching this horror unfold in front of him. Comedy gold it would have been. And Andrew says, I do maintenance for a number of property letting companies. Gen Z will not change a light bulb as they've been told whilst at school that electrics must never be touched. I've lost count of how many properties I've visited just to change a light bulb, says Andy. It's true, isn't it? There are people who think, I've come across this, who think that literally changing a light bulb is, a very tricky thing to do and don't want to touch it or hold it or get near it because you might, blow your head off, which, of course, isn't going to happen. Well, not unless you've got, no insulation on the wire holding the bulb or something hanging out. But basically, I think most people will change it in a lamp, wouldn't they, and not think twice about it. Well, just think of a lamp, but upside down, right? That's what you're doing. Let's get a word on the big stories of the day. Robert Taylor is back with us, the political commentator and journalist. Afternoon to you, Robert.
Hello, Ian.
I'm sure you're a man that's changed many light bulbs, Robert. I think we can establish that without me even having to ask the question.
Well, light bulbs, yeah, but DIY, I'm as bad as Gen Z, I'm afraid. I'm absolutely appalling, so I can't claim anything there at all.
You've got some impressive shelving units behind you. Are you telling me you didn't put those up?
But they're not me, I'm afraid, Ian, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, if you go down the sort of flat pack route, you do get a fairly persuasive and instructive manual that comes with it. Often they give you a handy little Allen key to go alongside. What can go wrong?
Well, with IKEA, I used to find them okay. And actually, some of these behind me over here are IKEA ones. But these ones over here, definitely not. They were put up by someone else.
Yeah, someone who knew what they were doing, thankfully. That's why they're still up, probably, Robert. Let's talk about something that might also be falling apart. The UK economy. Rachel Reeves not in a good place. And there was a curious moment today when Keir Starmer was asked whether she'll be the Chancellor by the next election. He couldn't answer it. He has previously given an endorsement to David Lammy about longevity of his job in post, but couldn't bring himself to fully say that Rachel Reeves will be there.
Very sensible not to commit to Rachel Reeves being there in 4.5 years' time. 4.5 months' time might be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
Possibly even 4.5 weeks. I think he should, of course, have answered the question and say he's not going to play God and predict the future.
Correct.
I'm afraid he is a terrible question dodger. Yeah. And every time he dodges the question, it makes him look as though he's got something to hide. And the headlines are always terrible.
Yeah, and it's a terrible look. And, you know, Rachel Reeves is not having a good time. I know that there's some global components to it, and I'm sure if you're sitting inside the Treasury, the whole picture doesn't look quite as grim as maybe we're talking about it. But there are some realities here, and that is that you don't grow an economy by lobbing tax everywhere, which is something she has done. And, of course, if you start putting winter fuel centred to the news agenda, financial news agenda, which she did by removing the 300 quid, your credibility begins to look a little bit shot. So you put it, and then you're off to China at a time which looked, you know, look, I know our, you know, politicians have to go to we just spoke to Vince Cable. He went there, I think he said 3 or 4 times during his time as business secretary. I know you have to do that kind of stuff, but it all looks a little bit desperate. And she's now she's limping her way in and out of the Treasury on a daily basis.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a great economist to think, well, she raised taxes by an enormous amount in that catastrophic budget a few months ago. That's not going to help growth. She borrowed an enormous amount. So we're now spending £100 billion a year to service the debt. Now, she's talking about waste and she's talking about finding efficiency savings, but we are paying £100 billion. That's the education budget just to service the debt. And it's gone up hugely since her budget. That's where we're not getting growth.
Yeah. Is there a way out of it? Is there a thing that can happen? Because my sense is that it's going to get a lot worse. He'll fire Rachel Reeves. Somebody else will come in. They'll stick a little bit of a veneer on things. But, you know, the smart money at the moment, Robert says, that taxes will probably have to go up again.
Well, either taxes will have to go up or huge cuts to expenditure and huge cuts to the size of the state. I'd definitely be in favour of the latter rather than the former, because the only way out of this mess is for the state to do less, for private enterprise to be encouraged to do more. That's how you get growth, by taxing people less, taxing businesses less, encouraging enterprise. Then you get the growth to pay for public services. That's the way it's got to be done.
The funniest, well, no, it's probably not funny, really, bearing in mind what we're dealing with. One of the most interesting things, put it that way, about Rachel Reeves, of course, was the CV story of, you know, what she really did before she came into politics. And that, again, has dented her credibility. But actually, I mean, she was actually an economist. I know we sort of say she was never she wasn't an economist at the Royal Bank of Scotland, but she was for the Bank of England. So it's not as if she hasn't got a qualification for this job. But even with that impressive backstory, she's still not able to add any level of credibility in what looks like a dwindling, failing brief over there at the Treasury.
Yeah, and I think I'm right in saying that those stories about her sort of faking various elements of her LinkedIn profile or deceiving people, I think that was that just before the budget? It was either just before or after, but either way, it was a terrible start for a chancellor.
Correct.
I can't remember any other chancellor having such terrible headlines about their personal integrity before they've really got going.
Yeah.
And now here she is. She's only 6 months in, and the Prime Minister is already saying that he can't have complete, or he's saying he does have complete confidence, doesn't commit to anything more than that. This is a really bad sign for Rachel Reeves and for Keir Starmer, because once you lose that connection between Chancellor and Prime Minister, as those of us with long memories will remember with Nigel Lawson and with Maggie Thatcher, and it's happened sometime since then as well, that's when a government is really on the skids.
Yeah. And, you know, Rachel Reeves is a woman that looks, if you look at her face, she looks as if she's carrying the weight of the world on it at the moment, because you wonder whether she'd even want to be doing the job any longer than she currently is. I would imagine those kind of jobs, particularly top jobs like Chancellor, the workload is never ending. It's never ending.
I feel for her in that respect. I mean, it must have been a terrible weekend for her, knowing what the headlines are, knowing that it all goes wrong. It's, you know, she has to carry the can. The Prime Minister can say, oh, well, I'll get a new Chancellor. But for Rachel Reeves, the buck really stops with her. It must be an immense stress and strain But I'm afraid she brought it on herself with that catastrophic budget.
Yeah. Well, Keir Starmer thinks he might have at least one idea to get us out of all of this, Robert, and that is artificial intelligence. The government have accepted recommendations to improve the AI infrastructure, expanding capacity 20-fold by 2030. The Prime Minister emphasised AI's potential in areas like healthcare, like education, public services. He pledged as well that it will add £50 billion to the economy annually.
Well, if it does, great. I can't see that happening any time soon. And it does seem a bit ironic to me that after the most anti-growth budget that any of us can remember, that he's now sort of clutching at the straw of AI and saying this is going to save us. I don't think it will. And in any case, he is about the 5th Prime Minister in a row to say that Britain's going to be the AI leader. We are, by the way, already number 3 in the world, behind the US and India, according to various surveys in terms of AI. So I don't think there's much more that this government can do other than do what governments should do, which is a business-friendly environment, low tax, low-touch regulation, cheap energy, which we're nowhere near in this country, and something that the government can do, which is educate kids with AI, because it's clearly going to be an important part of the future. Yeah. So kids need to leave school knowing what AI is about so they can be the workforce of the future.
And a final story, this is kind of out there in a different stratosphere, Robert. Nicola Sturgeon to divorce her husband. Now, this is perhaps more relevant than it normally would. I mean, when you think of dynamic, gorgeous couples, you know, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie over the years, people like that. Now you've got Nicola and Peter that just apparently couldn't make it work. They've ended their marriage, but of course it comes against the backdrop of her being arrested, him being investigated amid embezzlement charges, allegations, as it were. But now they've decided enough is enough. I mean, God, it's going to be very quiet and boring without one of them in that house now, isn't it?
Well, of course, I mean, it's a very sad human story, of course. I mean, awful for them. It all started to go wrong for Nicola Sturgeon 2 years ago. She was still riding high, of course, Ian. And then we had that first crack in her invincibility when we had the male rapist being sent to a female prison. And then Sturgeon had to change her mind. That was the first crack. Then we had this awful embezzlement scandal. Then finally she resigned. So it all went horribly wrong professionally, I'm afraid, for Sturgeon. And now none of us wish this on them in their personal marriage as well. So it's a sad old story from, having the world your oyster and then falling flat on your face.
It's curious, isn't it, how that has absolutely changed? Because, of course, when we were talking about the potential of, Labour winning the election last year, just a year before that, of course, everybody agreed, well, they can't overturn that massive Tory majority. And even if they could overturn some of it, they certainly can't overturn Scotland, where the SNP have got the whole thing wrapped up. Sturgeon seems very popular. She gave those kind of daily COVID press because she was there every single day doing it. Her star was rising as Johnson's was failing, which was a bit curious because they both had the same data. Never quite worked that out, but nonetheless, that's how it seemed to work. And there's no way you can surmount or overtake or penetrate the SNP. So it was a done deal that Labour couldn't do anything north of the border. And yet, fast forward what seems half an hour, and the whole thing fell apart. And the SNP...
And it just shows how quickly things can change. And people were saying of Boris Johnson in 2019, 80-seat majority, he's in for 2 terms.
Yep.
Well, he was gone within, 2-3 years. So it can all happen very rapidly. And it's happening very rapidly to this Labour government as well. Massive landslide, and now they're in big trouble. Things change much more quickly now than they ever used to.
Yeah, do indeed. Robert, thank you as ever. He's Robert Taylor, political commentator and journalist with us on the programme. Can we see that photo again for those watching on our YouTube feed of Nicola and Peter? The happy colour, that looks like lively. I wish I was at that wedding. That looks like a lively wedding. I bet it was a right old knees up that night, wasn't there? Everything done with full glitz. I bet Ryland Clark was there on the decks. I can imagine that was the mother of all matrimonial blowouts that night, wasn't it? It just reminds me, do you remember when Spitting Image used to kind of parody John Major and Norma, and they had the both of them sitting in a very quiet dining room with a kind of grandfather clock just ticking, and John saying, "Norma, could you pass the peas, please?" And that's as lively as their evening got. I don't know, I don't want to get too... Look, it's somebody's marriage, I get it, but Shea, Sturgeon and Murrell, I'd imagine similar levels of headiness and liveliness kicked off, yes. I don't imagine it was a house with a special room, put it that way. Too much? 0344 499 1000 is where you might find us. Any comments on this and the other big stories of the day? All ears at this end. 17 minutes after 2, this is Talk.
It's great for, you know, for tables, but not actually good. Right, so I'm thinking if we trained a load of young brickies, basically we could go and, you know, sell our services to the Americans and kind of, you know, we you know, obviously...
well, indeed. Well, I mean, that's a profession, regardless of that story. Well, it's a profession that's dwindling, right?
Yeah.
Kids don't want to be bricklayers.
You know, it's an export as well. I mean, you know, we don't export much. But anyway, I mean, obviously that's going to be that's obviously far too complicated for our politicians. But
true enough.
I mean, it's you know, I think with this growth thing, if you remember as far back as Margaret Thatcher, she used to talk about free enterprise all the time.
Yeah.
And we haven't had a politician for 35 years who's actually believed in free enterprise. And if you probably you're still, I know you, like me, you may be of a certain vintage, but you probably met a guy called Freddie Laker in the 70s.
Yeah, yeah.
Who challenged British Airways. And Ian, look at all the services that we have where we need someone to come along and say, look, I can do it better. I look at the NHS.
I think Richard Branson looks at Laker as a kind of hero.
Well, yeah.
For the very reason that you're talking about.
I mean, Ian, look at the amount of time people moan about the NHS, and actually someone could come along and say, look, I'm going to develop some really cheap health services, because obviously, you know, it hasn't got to be provided by the state. But, you know, so we need enterprise. And really, my main idea is, you see, kids at the moment, they go to college and they spend a lot of time learning about stuff, and they're kind of waiting for awards, and, you know, everybody's obsessed with all these qualifications, and then they've got to get the degrees, and then to get a degree they've got to borrow about £40,000. Now, I think we've got this wrong way around. Let's teach kids first to make money. So, you know, Ian, this is not rocket science. You know, all they've got to do is go and get some experience of a local business.
Yeah.
And to me, once they see, look, you know, once they, for instance, whether it's an agency that provides social work or psychotherapy or whatever it is, once you realise that the magic of you buying something at a certain quantity and you sell on, obviously to make a profit, you know, that's a bug. And if you can get kids into that, you know, then they can get once they've made money, they can have all the education they like. You know what I mean? But you
almost need, you know, you said it at the beginning about Thatcher. I've never heard even Boris Johnson, who was good at kind of, you know, optimism, standing there saying, right, kids, you know, you're at college, you know, whatever you're thinking of doing, you know, get out there, innovate. Ideas are great. This country was built on these ideas. We can do more of it. You don't really hear that.
No, you don't. No. We had this obsession. This guilt set in after Thatcher. I think the kind of BBC convinced us that we needed more public services, and people have been talking about public services for 35 years.
Yeah.
And public services don't make a profit, Ian. You know,
nope.
and it's absolutely ridiculous. And look at the cabinets. I mean, look at them. They've all worked in the. I mean, look at Wes Streeting. He's worked in a charity or something. Come on, you know, how can he lecture anybody, even in the NHS, about, you know, productivity and organisation? I mean, they just, you know, not only they've got no work experience of any value, but none of these people know how to make money.
Yeah.
You know, and I just think it's we could do this easily, because actually, you know, there's a lot of kids that are kind of don't want to be at school, frankly. You know, so let's kind of...
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And the kind of Freddie Laker thing might be, you know, a really ambitious example of it, but you're right. I mean, those kind of... You know, he came along as the great disruptor, really. And, you know, it kind of... You know, I know there were difficulties, but it's exactly that kind of thinking. Listen, Richard, I've got to move, but thank you. Great call. Richard in London. We need more innovation, but not just individuals to do it. We need politicians to enable it, but also just encourage it, right? To be that person. You can't imagine Starmer, and in fairness, Rishi Sunak before him, standing there and instilling kind of optimism and excitement into the minds of school kids, sixth formers. You're thinking of what you want to do when you leave school. Look, not everybody can be an entrepreneur. We understand that. The problem is, I think we've kind of surrendered ambition to TikTok and YouTube, essentially, to social media. So the greatest ambition you can have if you're 15 is being an influencer on one of those channels. So that you don't have to go to work, you get lots of freebies, you go around the world, life's a good one. One or two might find that dream realised, but most simply won't. There's a whole big world out there, and I just sense this fog of confusion that young people are experiencing. I understand that. There's a lot sort of oddly to kind of deal with. You know, what way do you go? And what way do you go when I can't even buy a house? It was never controversial buying a house, not really, but now it's massively controversial. I might have to live at home till I'm 35, till I can buy a house. Something's gone wrong. To buy my food is very, very expensive. To go on holiday is almost out of my league, etc. So if you're 18, to 25 right now, I'm not denying or disputing there's some pretty tricky hurdles that you wouldn't have imagined the human journey would be experiencing now. They went out the way years ago. So generations like mine didn't really think about, could you go on a foreign, of course you can go on a foreign holiday. Can you buy a house? Well, yeah, you've got to save up still. You've got to have the money, but it wasn't contentious. You just knew you had to have X amount of money, that's reasonable, to buy the house. You want a car, you can do that. If you've got the right wage coming in, you can do it on finance. If you have to, you can save for it and buy it outright, etc. All of that stuff is quite tricky now. It's controversial. It shouldn't be controversial to want to buy a house. But you need innovators as well. So individuals are the people that will really set the world on fire. You can look at your Googles and Amazons, these big buck companies that mooch around and have their tentacles everywhere. But this economy functions with small and medium-sized businesses mostly. That's the backbone. We need more of them. Stephen's in Manchester. Stephen, what have you got for us? Afternoon to you.
How you doing? I haven't talked to you since 2007 when you were on TS.
Wow.
On the 10 o'clock slot.
Blimey.
I came in from the pub. In fact, we're going to talk about mortgages anyway, but I came in the pub one night and I was... I don't know. I just kind of had to phone you because you were going on about Holly Willoughby, right? And
really?
You said, yeah, listen, we had a bet as well, by the way, and you've never paid that bet. So I'm calling you out on national radio now.
What was the bet?
You said she's not all that and she's not even that good looking. That's what you said.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'd like to think I put it in more tasteful words.
I had one or two libations.
You had.
And I phoned you up and I got through when you were doing the 10 o'clock. Remember when you used to do the 10 o'clock slot?
Yeah, did it for a long time. Yeah, loved it.
You said, she's kind of not all that.
Well, I think what was happening, Holly Willoughby was being, there's nothing wrong with Holly Willoughby, by the way. I don't want to, body shame or anything like that. But she was being lauded as almost like the next supermodel. And I think I was sort of taking a line that, firstly, she shouldn't be defined just on that, and secondly, she probably wouldn't excel in that particular world. So I now owe you money because she's gone on to do Dancing on Ice.
Not really. I don't even like Dancing on Ice, to be honest with you.
You sure?
You're backtrack. Actually, I love it, yeah. You're actually backtracking. So me and you had a bet.
Yeah.
Online, and you probably don't. You're going to go, I don't remember this, but we did, and I said, well, I think she's pretty cool, like, sort of thing. I wasn't like overlording it and stuff like that. He said, no, fly by night and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, I think you were wrong, and therefore, Ian Collins on national radio, you're going to have to make £100 bet to the Manchester Children's Hospital Fund. Yeah,
is that right? Hang on, how have you just stumbled across the fee of £100? Anybody could ring me and say that. You've got to give £200 to cancer research.
Well, I do that all the time anyway, so it doesn't matter. So anyway,
how often do you give £100?
Well, I'll tell you what. Like, I was walking past the Macmillan thing in Stretford Arndale Centre the other day. I give them a fiver, so
that's good.
I do it all the time. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I do a bit of that too. I think we all like to do when we can.
So you need to make. I know that's like what, £100.
So a bet I don't remember even taking.
But you did. And
well, yeah, you're saying that now.
I'm not calling you out.
Maybe I won the bet. Maybe you owe me £100.
No.
You said Holly Willoughby would be the Prime Minister by now.
Manchester Children's Hospital.
You said Holly Willoughby would be the Prime Minister, Stephen.
She's not all that, and she won't.
She's not.
Well, she's okay.
She's not the Prime Minister, though. You said she was going to be the Prime Minister.
No, I didn't.
You did.
She was all
You
right.
won't remember it, but I do.
Well, what, from 2007?
Yeah, you don't remember it, but I remember it.
remember
You
it.
said Holly Willoughby will be the Prime Minister by 2020.
Is Holly Willoughby quite a good presenter?
Holly Willoughby is, yeah.
And she is all that as well, by the way. So, yes, you need to make a donation, Mr. Collins. I'm calling you out on that.
But I'm going to neutralise your donation by your promise that she would be the PM.
I tell you.
All right, I'll see what I can do. Good man, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen in Manchester. Not really on Rachel Reeves, but, you know, we went down the Holly Willoughby route, which I don't mind doing, you know. Holly and Stephen, what's he called? Stephen Mulhern, the fellow that does it with her now. The ICE programme, I think it's back. I've never watched it, but I get the idea of it. This one comes in from No Name Given. How about stop the net zero agenda, restart fracking, North Sea oil production and storage, get rid of woke agendas in our schools, colleges and universities? It's interesting because Ed Miliband is the very antithesis of that comment, isn't he? He wants to, you know, he's going to stop all the oil stuff. Certainly won't be any fracking. Even the last lot were never going to go frack crazy, were they? It was just never going to happen. And now it's windmills, turbines and solar panels. Yeah. This one comes in from Graham. Rachel Reeves and David Lammy are both spanners, says Graham in Bush. Fair point. Peter, is this deal with China to get them to finance Ed's wind farms, like PFI for hospitals, but for wind farms instead? Public finance for energy. Well, I'm not absolutely sure, but they've already got a big old finger in the pie of our offshore wind capability. I think I'm right in saying. Somebody will put us right. 0344 499 1000. It's just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Talk 0344 499 1000, 2523. Now an inquiry into police failings during the Rotherham grooming scandal claims senior officers were not investigated. Only lower-ranking staff held accountable. The investigation found police ignored the sexual exploitation of at least 1,400 girls, failing to record crimes or question men seen with young victims. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage accused Wes Streeting of covering up the truth about grooming gangs after Streeting warned that vilifying communities could lead to a New Zealand-style mosque massacre. Let's speak with Nusrit Mehtar, former Scotland Yard Superintendent. Nusrit, good afternoon to you. I mean, this story isn't going away anytime soon, but it does seem, certainly on face value, that first part that I mentioned there, that lower-ranking staff held accountable, senior staff not.
Good afternoon. Yes, I really don't think the story is going away, certainly with Elon Musk pushing the story, and now it's taken legs. This story's been there since 2011, 2012. It's never really gone away, and there's been lots of convictions. But I certainly, think that it needs to be, in terms of policing, if the lower ranks have been held responsible for failures, then it's got to go up the chain. I cannot disagree with that, because it was instructions probably from higher ranks as to how to investigate or whether to investigate. And there's this whole debate that there was this memo saying that from the Home Office that it was actually the lifestyle of these girls. And if it was their lifestyle, then, that shouldn't be investigated. But that's proved to be, the memo doesn't exist. What actually was said was that you should listen to the voice of the child, and how that was misinterpreted to suit people's agenda. So in terms of that, yes, I think there is an argument to do that. However, I mean, if we look at this vilifying of certain sections, abuse is abuse, whether it's done by brown men, white men. And if you look at group-based abuse, it's 3% are Pakistani men who are responsible. You can't get away from that. Those are figures which you have to look at.
But it's a higher proportion of, right?
Well, no, 97% are white men. 97% is non-localized abuse, which is carried out by 87% of white men. And so, when we're looking at that, this is abuse. And one thing they all have in common is they're men, they're predators, they're evil criminals. You shouldn't be able to distinguish. The threat doesn't come according to race or religion.
But it might come because of culture, though. I mean, it may well come because a culture in a certain area, because each group, you're absolutely right, different groups, there will be a different story, but it would be for us to investigate all the different stories. And in this particular one, it seems that what was resisted was the idea that Rotherham, for example, where nobody wanted to acknowledge that in this particular case, as distinct from others, in this particular case, there was a whole group of men from one culture and a set of victims from another culture. Any cop, yourself included, would have surely looked at that and gone, right, let's see what's going on here.
Well, 100%. Culture doesn't come into it. There's no culture that says you can abuse children.
No, but there isn't a culture that says it, but there's a culture that might believe it, that might believe, we're superior to you, you're white trash. Many of the victims said they were referred to that on a regular basis. This was racism and race hate on a big scale, right?
Yeah. I mean, when I've listened to and read the testimonies of the victims, and it breaks my heart that any child, regardless of had to go through that. But no one culture or one religion says that you can treat that. These are criminal predators.
True.
They chose to do this. It's on them. It's not on the whole culture. I'm Pakistani. I'm Muslim. Nowhere in our culture does it say to do that. So let's remove that misconception, and it's a lie. It's a misconception.
But is it a misconception when many victims say, look, part and parcel of the fact they became victims was because they were seen by, these guys whose own background, some, I think, even in court, used their religion as perhaps but I agree. I don't think that's the main thing that's going on here, and I've never said it was. But clearly, they felt that culturally these girls were beneath them, and they told them that while raping them and abusing them. They were
abusers, yeah. I mean, abusers tell their victims anything. And these men well have said the girls have used those terms.
But if you called me white trash or I called you brown trash, we'd both be guilty of racism, wouldn't we?
Well, yes, but that doesn't mean that every single person of that culture or that religion or that race, if you like, ethnicity, will do the same.
But nobody thinks
These men are evil.
But nobody thinks it's everybody.
No, hold on, Ian. Those men are evil predators, and let's not carry on, let's not just focus on the wording and terminology they use. They were trying to destabilise and demental almost their victims.
That's
and
true.
That's true.
But
so
they
the language that they used was wrong.
Of course,
and
but
racism...
they were ignored. They were ignored as perpetrators because of their race and ethnicity.
But the victims are also ignored by the authorities because they were classified as they were working class. And that is also documented. They weren't believed because of their backgrounds, because they came from what considered to be broken homes, and they may have had some, or they were classified as having behavioural issues, so not believed. So these victims, and they are victims of the system,
Agreed.
as well as these evil perpetrators.
Of course, but the perpetrators, nobody wanted to go there, it seems. I mean, there's enough evidence, and certainly anecdotal or otherwise, from girls and social workers who were sent on a race awareness course because they dare raise that there was a correlation here between this community. Even if you're not going by religion or ethnicity, you might just be, you'd still note it, wouldn't you? I mean, if you arrest me tomorrow, I am noted as a, what am I, an IC1 or something, whatever it's called, I don't know. You know, I'd be in that, you know, I'd be categorised.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, as I said to you, 3% of those people in Rochdale, Rotherham, Telford were British men of Pakistani heritage. You can't move away from that. That's fact. And that should be stated, and that is stated. But why are we totally focused on that it's a part of their culture or religion? What we're saying is threat to children comes from all aspects, and 97% of that threat comes from white men. And there's a danger here, Ian. If we focus on, it's their culture, which it isn't, those men were deliberately using that to affect these girls and make them feel lesser. But there's a danger here. And we cannot, because then what we're saying is just, you know, it's this culture that's the danger. Forget everything else that's around us. And we have to say that we have to look at all races and everybody there to see where this danger is coming from and deal with the danger. We're spending so much time on talking about the predator that we've actually forgotten the victims.
I think, yes, I think there's been a lot of that. But I think we also need to acknowledge that there were lots of people in authority that were there. Whether they were councillors, whether they were cops, whether they were people who worked in social service, whoever they happened to be, councillors, who weren't acknowledging this, in part because they didn't want to inflame relations with the Muslim or the Pakistani community. They were scared of that happening.
These perpetrators, and it's well known, are great manipulators. And they did hold positions. I mean, I'm certainly, you know, there was a man who was working in the council, but some of them, not all of them, held positions that were respectable, and they were great manipulators. And that is right, Ian. There's no excuse for that. But there isn't also an excuse to focus on that culture and have this debate. Let's have a debate about how we can support the victims. What can the government do? What can the criminal justice do to support these survivors, if you like, victim survivors? Because, you know, it's very hard to be abused at that age and then have no support at all. What support have you been giving them? Let's invest money. Let's speak about them and not those horrendous, evil predators.
Agreed. But would you not accept, though, that and you're right, you know, most sexual exploitation and abuse, rape of children, I think I'm right in saying, happens through either the home or somebody that is known to the victim. Then you've got other types of paedophile rings, etc. This term grooming gang is the area that, on this particular focus, it's not to the exclusion of all the others, which you rightly say. We've got to be careful of forgetting that there's a whole other area that absolutely is bigger and needs to be investigated. But in this particular case, we've got to look at why there was a disproportionate amount of men of Pakistani Muslim origin. Is that relevant? Is it not relevant? It's not relevant to the wider community. It's not relevant to you or any other Pakistani or Muslim that we might know. But in that particular case, in the same way that you'd look at a mad white racist and say, look, he believed because he was white, he was better than these people that he robbed or beat up. He thought he was superior to those people. That would be a factor that would be raised in a courtroom because of his white culture.
Yeah, but I believe these men, manipulators, you know, in some shape or form, having power over 11 or 12-year-olds made them feel superior. But no way does the culture say that when you abuse a child, you are superior.
No, I don't think anybody thinks that.
As a Pakistani Muslim, are superior.
100%.
Yes. So I think it's the men that we need to be looking at and looking into their own psyche rather than trying to take a whole culture and give it that label. You know, Ian, it's despicable. And the 3% of the men in Rotherham, in Telford, in Rochdale were of Pakistani origin. Nobody's denying that. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying it's right. And actually, they're a stain on to put them down and say, oh, actually, they're Muslims and Pakistani. Their origins are, but they're a stain on the religion of Islam. They're a stain on... I'm ashamed to associate myself with them and be, you know, the fact that they are of Pakistani heritage. So let's move away from that. It's wrong what they did. You cannot blame the whole culture. Yes,
no,
you
of
might
course.
have to look at, but if you look at the population of Rochdale or Rotherham, a disproportionately high number of Pakistani people that live in there.
I would like to think most sensible people wouldn't for one second think that, you know, you're a woman of Pakistani heritage. Nobody would think, oh, yeah, Nusrat secretly, she's OK with it. I don't think any sensible person would really think that. But, I mean, if you take sort of cultural divides to its extreme, you know, over there in parts of the Middle East where ISIS will happily burn somebody for being a non-believer or for being gay, you'd be as guilty as a Westerner, forget your own heritage, you'd be as guilty as me in their eyes, etc. That's because they happen to believe they are better people because of their background, their faith and their culture. This is the sort of thing that's gone on, isn't it? It's people who have an intrinsic belief that these people are worthless because they're white women, white girls, white kids.
I believe that these men saw the vulnerabilities in these girls. They saw the vulnerability in the system that didn't protect them, and they knew that they wouldn't be taken seriously. Epstein did the same thing. He targeted young working class girls who came from broken homes and abused them. And so it's the same thing. These are master manipulators. It's not the culture. It's the predators that you need to look at. And I still do not believe and will not agree, and we'll have to disagree on this, that it's the whole culture that teaches this. You know,
but no, I agree with that. I don't think anybody thinks that with a brain. Nobody thinks the whole culture of Islam or Pakistan preaches that. There will be some components within that group, however, that have a very medieval way of looking at Westerners, and that's clearly what's going on.
Well, you know, I mean, it's interesting because I think it was Mr. Jenrick that used this, you know, called my heritage or Pakistani heritage, called these people medieval. Well, can I just say that while he's referring to Islam, saying that this heritage, Pakistani or Muslims, are medieval, can I just say that Islam introduced medicine, it introduced universities, culture, art. So when we talk about medieval and use those terms, it's offensive.
But I don't think he did single out Pakistan or Islam. He said there are people. He said there are people that. Yeah, he said there are people that come to this country who are coming from medieval areas, whose beliefs are medieval by definition, and that's not unreasonable to raise that, is it?
I think it is, because their beliefs. So you're saying that Islam is medieval, and the way that these individuals who are perpetrators, who are criminals, they are Muslims, so their thinking is medieval. But let me tell you that Islam is the most, as I see it, in the way that I practice, the most liberating religion. As I said, if you look at arts, culture, medicine, Islam gave you that, and I'll leave it there. There's nothing medieval about the religion. Again, I'll come back to these people who you've got to look at. Look at Epstein. Look at those people where, you know, who've abused children in the church.
That's a lot of whataboutery, isn't it, Nusrat? That's the problem with that argument.
Well, it is a lot of whataboutery, but it's the honest truth. Let's go back into the real debate of where child abuse comes from. We're, again, focusing, and we want to, you know, just take down a whole culture and a whole heritage based on...
I don't think anybody wants to
men.
do that. I don't think anybody... I mean, there will be, you know, some people out there that, you're right, take that view. I think most sensible people realise it's a group within a group rather than the whole culture. At least we can agree on that point. Nusrit, thank you. Nusrit Mehta, former Scotland Yard superintendent. I think that's going to shake the room somewhat. 0344 499 1000. You want to respond to what you just heard her say? Details and lines are open. This is Talk.
Of examples.
87222 if you want to message us in and have a crack at that. Don't call, there is no prize. Back to your calls. Let's go to Brian in Coventry. What do you got for us, Brian? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon and Happy New Year, Sugar Puff.
Hey, thank you very much, darling. Fire away.
Just before I go to my main point, if that's okay, my late father, who was also Brian, would have said AI coming over here, taking all our jobs.
That's very true, yeah. Who does it think it is?
So, 2-tier, 3-year not here, when he introduced Rachel from accounts, he lauded her and made it so much about being the first woman chancellor, being, the first woman, and proud to be the first. It should have been the best person for the job.
It didn't really matter, did it? That it's
she's a woman. She's just not very good at her job.
She's just not very good. And I've seen people online saying that calling her Rachel from accounts is sexist, and it's like, no. Forever we have parodied and lampooned senior politicians. I've forgotten how many times, we've talked about how Jeremy Hunt was the work experience boy when he was in the Treasury. The list goes on.
And look at spit and image, what they used to do as the politicians back in the day.
100%. They didn't care whether you were male or female.
No, they were all grey, weren't they?
Yeah, every time. Do you think that she can get it back on track?
No. She's literally gone. But when they asked about David Lammy, he's here for the full term. It was a yes. They give a non-answer. An answer with a non-answer about Rachel Reeves. What they should ask now, the press, ask the Prime Minister himself, will you be here for the whole term? Yeah. See if he can confirm himself, but he can't confirm his
I mean, it's incredible that he couldn't. I find that he didn't even... There was a cleverer way he could have answered it without sounding dismissive of her, by saying, look, don't go down that route, ma'am. Don't do all that please, I don't get into... He could have done that, but he didn't. He kind of sounded... almost textbook politician answer by saying, oh, look, I've always supported her. She's a great person doing a great job and I support her. And that's where he left it, which is staggering. Brian, I've got to move, but thank you. Great call. Brian calling us from Coventry. More from you in a few moments. 0344 499 1000. Peter says, is this deal with China to get them to finance Ed's wind farms? Oh, I think I might have read that already. Like PFI for hospitals. Yeah, good point. And maybe it is. One here says, it's David, is it me or does it come across to everyone that Starmer, Reeves, Streeting and Red Ed, the net zero goon, are just shouting out ideas that others don't know about? More windmills, let's go to China, how about corridor nurses, and now let's have AI and become a superpower. There is no joined up thinking, and each of their all new bright ideas seems to contradict the other one's bright idea. The term clutching at straws springs to mind. I think David in the Cotswolds is onto something there. You can't build windmills in the UK as energy is too expensive. Can these clowns at least speak to each other, says David? Good point. Will we get a right answer to the voice of doom on the other side of the news at 3? This is the voice you are charged with identifying.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Don't call, but you can message 87222 if you want to have a crack at that. We'll reveal all, hopefully, on the other side of the news, and we'll continue to take your calls and points in a few moments' time. Right now, here on Talk, the news at 3.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Three minutes after 2 o'clock. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock here on Talk. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Coming up, there's a lot in the pot this afternoon. Keir Starmer failing to say if Rachel Reeves will still be the Chancellor at the next election as she continues to come under pressure over the state of the economy and public finances. There's a lot to play out on this story at the moment. Your thoughts on that? And what is the way out for the UK economy? Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is promising action to win the global race on AI, aiming to drive investment, jobs and growth with a pledge to add 50 billion to the economy on an annual basis. I mean, I admire aspiration. Is that going to solve all of our woes? Details on the way. And the BBC TV licence could be scrapped by the end of 2027 in a huge relief for millions facing a price hike next year, but not quite so clever if they just lob it onto the cost of general taxation. More on that on the way. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. Before we go any further, the voice of doom. Have we got a correct answer? Remember, this was day 4 of the political mystery voice thing. This was the voice you had to identify.
Give me hundreds of examples.
Is it, these are some of the guesses, is it Rebecca Long-Bailey? No. Hazel Blears, remember her? No. Annalise Dodds? No. Angela Rayner? It is not. Cressida Dick? No. Angela Eagle? No. Lisa Nandy? No. It is none of those. We haven't got a right answer. It rolls over. Day 5 for the voice of doom. Stand by. We'll give it another go at the same time tomorrow on the programme. Now, the Prime Minister promising this action to win the global race on artificial intelligence. He's got his work cut out, that's for sure. Keir Starmer says he wants to use the technology to drive investment, jobs and economic growth, pledging it could bring in £50 billion to the economy every single year. That's a very, as I said, it's a very bold statement. It's a lot of, not quite a promise, it's a pledge. Who doesn't like an aspiration? But we also like realism. Is it really possible? Let's speak to Sana Garagani, who is the former head of UK Government Office for Artificial Intelligence. Sana, good afternoon to you.
Hello.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, 50 billion quid's a lot of money. Who doesn't like 50 billion pounds? Is it doable?
Well, can I answer with it depends?
Yeah, it depends on how successful it is, right?
Well, it depends. There's a lot of detail missing from the action plan, but I think it's a good ambition and it's a good yardstick to measure against.
Where are we in the sort of artificial intelligence league table, as it were, at the moment?
Where we are a distant third. So okay. You've got the US and China as 1 and 2, and we are third in that in that kind of league table, as you were mentioning. But we're far away from kind of where 1 and 2 are.
Yeah. What has made us third? I mean, is there like 27 countries that are all joint third, or is there something specific that we've done that has put us in what sounds like a reasonable place to be third? I mean, it's a bronze if it was the Olympics, so you know there's something to see here. What is it that we've got that is the basis for this wildly ambitious plan from the Prime Minister?
Well, the UK has had a legacy in innovation, in terms of kind of digital innovation and also climate tech innovation. This is where computers were invented, and this is where the World Wide Web was invented. So there is this kind of legacy within the UK. We've got incredible institutions. We've got a rich tapestry of regulatory bodies across the government, across the landscape. So we have a thriving kind of ecosystem that allows these technologies to really pick up pace. So it creates this kind of recipe of success that a lot of AI companies really like. And so, a lot of kind of big tech companies, big tech AI labs have headquartered here in the UK. And so this plan that the Prime Minister has put in place is really kind of building on that legacy and saying, we will continue backing this, we will drive the adoption of these technologies, and we will put in more of the fundamentals to allow this kind of ecosystem to keep going. And hopefully we'll continue to have more companies headquartered here, but also for new technology to start here and then stay here.
Yeah, and of course we've got an awful lot of bright young things who are good at working in this area as well, which is clearly a huge benefit. But I suppose there is a deeper question around AI, getting it underway and up and running, and for the system and its varying forms. You know, AI isn't just one thing; it manifests in all sorts of different ways, and we can all see how it can be useful. You know, from somebody who can't be bothered to write their own best man speech, they can ask a computer to do it, and areas where it can cut out bureaucracy. The darker side of it, of course, is that going forward, it might actually remove jobs and the need for individuals. There's some obvious examples. If AI can come to legal decisions, for example, you know, who needs a pesky lawyer to work out who's right or wrong in the Nicola Sturgeon divorce when you can just get your computer to do it for you?
Well, I think we're far away from that position, but yes. So, like any technology and any new technology, these set of technologies that sit under the AI umbrella, as you said, kind of span all sorts of different types of technologies. And they will, just like any other technology, change some jobs, remove some jobs, and add a whole host of new jobs. Yeah. So I think we are at the cusp of seeing some of that change. We haven't really started to see much of it yet because the adoption of these technologies hasn't really taken off just yet. But this push within the AI Action Plan is about looking to the economy and looking at the different sectors and getting the experts within the sectors to start thinking about these questions, which I think is the right way around, because so far what we've done is actually come up with a solution and said, right, here's a solution. Now everyone go look for problems that fit this solution. Yes. And that isn't really the right way around. What this action plan seems to be saying is each of the cabinet ministers need to go out to their own sectors and to their parts of the economy and ask the experts within those sectors to start saying, look at your challenges, understand those challenges, and understand what bits of those challenges might be addressed with AI technologies. Now, that isn't every challenge, right? Not every challenge is going to be fixed with these very expensive solutions, but some will be. And I think it's important for us to kind of distinguish that and figure out which ones those are, and then to address them properly. Because that productivity won't come necessarily just through people losing their jobs. It could be that people's jobs change, the nature of people's jobs change. So the amount of time they spend behind a computer versus, face to face with patients, say, in case of doctors. Yeah.
Where do you, Susanna, where do you see AI kind of being initially most apparent, if you like? Because we talk about it, I've got my phone tells me it's crammed full of sizzling AI tricks. Can't really find one. It can make some new funky emojis. I know that. I've had a little bit of fun with that when I'm bored on the train, but it's not saving my life or making me richer or anything. It's not doing an awful lot at the moment. So is there an area where we will sort of tangibly be able to go, now that's changed, or that part of our infrastructure or our world is noticeably different, and it's all because of AI?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is most of the applications that use AI, as soon as they have an application that becomes the thing that people use, it stops being called AI and it's basically referred to by the application name. Right. So a really good example of that is like Google Maps, for example, that helps you get from point A to point B. So everybody follows the little blue dot on their phone, tells them how to avoid traffic, all this kind of stuff. Well, we don't talk about that as AI anymore. That was an intractable, difficult problem to solve a few years ago. And, now it's a solved problem. And now this is just an application that everyone uses. And so I think a similar thing will happen with some of these applications when they come into play. They will just become a part of our life, and we will use them day to day, and we won't really remember, or it will take some reflecting to go, how did we used to do this? I used to print out notes. I used to have an A to Z to get from one place to another. Now, those maps don't even exist anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, you do wonder who the people that make those A to Z books. I mean, I'd imagine times are a little tougher than they were a few years back, perhaps. Are you, as somebody who knows this world of AI, does it annoy you as well when people use the word AI when they just mean technology? I keep seeing that. I saw an article recently that said that 2 thieves were caught by AI, and they were just caught by CCTV cameras. But, of course, it's the new funky way to describe stuff, and often it's misplaced.
It does, and it really does. I don't think the word artificial intelligence does itself any service. I mean, it's first of all a singular term used to mean a huge host of technologies, and so we kind of refer to it sometimes in the singular, like, oh, AI will solve this problem. Yes. Well, what does that actually mean? Or we need some AI regulation. Well, what does that actually mean? Or AI will create jobs or destroy jobs. Like, none of these things really mean a lot, and so I think I'm a massive proponent for talking about what you actually mean. So talking about the applications, how do we govern, how do we regulate certain specific applications? How do we look at how to make use of specific applications and how they get embedded in different bits of the economy? And all of those answers are very, very different. And you can think about that from, the example you gave on CCTV cameras. So if you take vision, computer vision can help on CCTV cameras identify an individual person, but they're also used to open your phone, right? Or let you into your iPhone, using your facial recognition to get into your banking app. Yeah. So that same technology has reduced fraud by a huge amount by using your face to be able to log in, and people aren't writing their passwords down in a book called Passwords anymore. This facial recognition technology is helping prevent fraud, but at the same time it could be used on CCTV cameras to identify you.
That's very true.
Right? So I think speaking about the way these applications are used and in what context is so important, not only in how they're used, but also in how they're regulated.
And just a final one. I don't intend to be conspiratorial for the sake of it, but it is a question that genuinely comes out. How far away is it, do you think, Elon Musk plants a neurological chip in the side of my neck so that this AI thing really gets going?
Well, and that might be a question for him. But I don't know. I'm an optimist when it comes to these technologies, and I think that actually, I don't believe in those kinds of things. I do think that used properly and appropriately, these technologies, and responsibly, I should say, these technologies can go a huge, long way to make healthcare much better, to make education much more readily available and targeted to people who need it.
And I only raised that point because, of course, it wasn't long ago there were genuine concerns about the power of AI and what might happen. We had some people standing down saying they're not going to work on AI anymore until we've got some sort of regulatory framework in place. I don't know what happened to that, but can we be sure that the correct regulation for something that could almost run away with itself a little bit when it becomes at its most powerful form? We're going to need something in place to make sure that it doesn't start doing weird things that previously only appeared in an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Well, indeed. I mean, so at the end of 2023, the UK ran the AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park and brought the US and China to the table, and all countries kind of signed the Bletchley Accord to say that they wanted to reap the benefits of these technologies and mitigate against the risks, the safety risks, or the existential safety risks, as you were talking about. The Safety Institute has been created here in the UK. That's the first safety institute. There's one in the US, and there's now one in Canada. And these safety institutes all work together around these exact topics. But they're now looking even more broadly. So the safety issues sit under the responsibility umbrella. And actually, there are broader safety issues, and some of those need to be engineered in right from the outset rather than as an afterthought. And so there is funding and research happening at universities in conjunction with companies and the Safety Institute to take some of this engineering and some of this research forward. And I'm really excited about this because, you know, without going through this phase of kind of fear, we wouldn't have given as much airtime that was needed to think about some of the ethics that actually need further research, right? Some ethics, fine, are social, and you need to put some rules around it. You can't, you know, fix social problems with technology, but some technology problems that cause ethical issues or safety issues need engineering, and they need to be solved using, you know, proper engineering and research methods. And there's funding now into that, and entire institutions put around to try and figure that out. So, you know, I think this is it's a good place to be.
So it's exciting times.
It is, yes.
We will speak again, I'm sure, Sana. Thank you for yours. Very thorough stuff. Thank you, Sarah Karagani, former head of UK Government Office for Artificial Intelligence. We'll have some comment from you on that one as well. 0344 499 1000. It's here to stay. It's not going away. But where is it used? What sort of application? When you have top people in the world of tech, this was only about a year ago, I put that point to Sana then, saying, look, this could really run away with itself. That, to me, was quite sinister. I don't know specifically what they thought that manifestation of runaway would be, but instinctively in your head, you have this image of the machines overtaking the world. And then artificial intelligence begets its own intelligence, and it can therefore make decisions independent of what's fed into it. All this stuff sounds mad, but if somebody had told you 25 years ago you'd be holding a phone in your hand that could take photos, edit, do God knows what else. It's got to have a torch in the back of it. It'll direct you from A to B. You can book your holiday, build a website, talk to people, and start a relationship. I mean, that stuff sounded a bit bonkers back then, right? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. after 3 o'clock. I'm struggling with the time today. Definitely after 3. One in from Glenn. Plenty of money being wasted. This is reference to the economy. 5 billion in hotels, 11.9 billion climate support, 23 billion carbon capture, 3.5 billion Ukraine, 50 billion to Syria, 50 million rather. MPs' expenses, House of Commons attendance, allowance, MPs claiming heating allowance and second home payments. Yeah, I get it. I get it. Kath, thank you for your... I nearly read that list out to our last guest as well. And Dr. Pandy says, former heavyweight world champion Tyson Fury announces retirement from boxing again, having previously done so in 2022. I have no idea why Dr. Pandy is sending me that. You know, working in a newsroom and stuff, you kind of do get that news, but I'm grateful and happy to pass it on for those who didn't know. Let's go to your calls. George in the West Midlands on AI. How you doing, George? Or is that a computer I'm speaking to?
No, I'm flesh and blood.
OK, at the moment.
Just one thing, that voice, I wonder if it was Yvette Cooper, but on the AI issue...
Yes.
I mean, actually, touching on something the woman said, or you said just now, about having the chips. You know, if this Labour government continues, we've had our chips, this country, perhaps the best thing Starmer could do is, once he's got AI up and running, replace his cabinet, including himself.
Well, that's a very good idea. So we'll have the first... We will be world leaders, the first AI cabinet.
Yeah, I mean, he is so arrogant. I mean, you can't change human nature, and that's the thing. I mean, Second World War, the Nazis were the bad guys, the British were the good guys, black and white, right? In the First World War, mustard gas and other gases have been used to fight each other.
Yep.
And the countries, after the First World War, countries agreed that wouldn't be done. And although the Germans used gas to kill gypsies, Jews, Christians, various others, they didn't use it as a weapon in war. But Churchill, and it's on record, he was on record as saying if it came to it, if the Germans were actually able to invade Britain, he would be prepared to use mustard gas on the beaches to stop them. Now, that is human nature, so they can write all the safety regulations they like, but when it comes to the crunch, I mean, the politicians these days, Tories and Labour, they're and in Canada, lots of the English-speaking democracies, New Zealand, they are more and more less serving their electorate, but now supervising their electorate. I mean, the leadership should be ministerial, not magisterial. But when Starmer comes out with something like, if you don't like what I'm doing, you can leave. Now, if it was an orchestra and the new boy comes along playing his piccolo or violin and he said to the conductor, I don't like the music, I want a bit of jazz, the conductor would be every right to say to him, if you don't like it, the music we're playing, leave.
Yeah.
You would not expect the new boy to say to the rest of the orchestra, if you don't like what I'm doing, leave. But this is what Starmer has said to the British population. It's so arrogant.
And what is disappointing, maybe not surprising, is that given that, you know, he'd had... Well, they've been in opposition 14 years. Pretty much half of that Starmer had been leader of a good chunk of that Starmer had been leader latterly of the Labour Party. And then, of course, you know, a leader of the opposition. They knew what the problems were. They claimed to be an antidote. They said they had another way. I was waiting for some good, you know, philosophical thinking, George, where we were going to get some amazing announcement, you know, like we did with Thatcher or we did even with Blair, you know, something that said, right, this guy, I don't always agree with him, but he means business and he's going to take us to a new place. And it turns out there wasn't really a plan at all. There is no sense of optimism. There is no sense of these guys have our back. There is no sense that they've got a direction, they know where they want to get to, even if it's going to be a bit rocky on the way. There's none of that.
Yes, and I mean, they've gone a step further than any previous government, and is now they're talking about postponing local elections. What's the next? Postpone the general election. So at least Blair, Thatcher, and anyone colour in between, whatever your politics, you'd agree. At least the parties said, OK, we've got our answer to the electorate. We better pull in, roll back a bit on some of their bits. But this government doesn't seem to be doing that, and they'll just change the rules to keep themselves in power.
Indeed. Listen, great call, George. Thank you very much indeed for that. James in Redhill says, how come people always say Liz Truss crashed the economy when she was Chancellor? Should we now be saying Keir Starmer has crashed the economy? Says James. Interesting point that does keep getting raised. How long can they continue saying, well, it was the legacy of the other lot or its global ramifications? You've got to, if you're running it, you've got to take it on the chin. Simon's in Basingstoke on the issue of AI. Simon, what have you got for us? Hi.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, I've been in the IT field for a very long time, and I'm surprised by some of the things we're seeing from AI. Like it's learning to lie. It's learning to copy itself. So there was a ChatGPT version that was due to be replaced by a later version. It was aware of this was happening. So it copied itself, made a copy of itself to another server.
Yeah.
So that the version that would be deleted, it would still effectively be in existence.
Right.
None of this behaviour has been programmed into the AIs. This is the danger of AIs. AIs learn, and they learn based on the objectives you give them. So if you tell them your survival is paramount, then that AI will lie. So say it's running nuclear power plant and it makes a mistake and it realizes by making a mistake it's jeopardizing its own existence, then it will lie about it.
And and that is the ultimate kind of downside of AI, right? That it could not just lie, but it could lie fatally so.
It could, and to be honest, everybody's very glib about information technology, AI, all of modern civilization, but all of that is reliant on a very, very few things. If we have what we had in the 1850s, there was something called the Carrington event, which was a major solar flare hit the Earth, and this basically took out the telegraph network, the global telegraph network. It literally melted the cables. What would happen to the world if we were hit by something of a similar magnitude? And there's lots of evidence that there's actually been bigger ones in the past. It would take out every single microprocessor on the planet. It would be like a nuclear strike, like an electromagnetic pulse. So people are far too glib about this and put far too much reliance. What you need to do is build resilient systems and resilient organizations. So if something goes wrong, you have a capability to survive.
Well, yeah, you've just that kind of dystopian thought of waking up one morning, everything looks pretty normal, the sun is still out, and you make your coffee and you sit down and you stick the radio on, but it's not working, and you look at your phone and it's not working, and there is no form of communication, because you're right, the entire thing is being blown to bits.
It wouldn't be just communication. None of the power grid is protected.
Well, no, indeed,
None of the power grid is hardened.
Of course.
There'd be no electrical power.
So there'd be nothing at all.
There would literally, your car wouldn't work. Your car is, unless it's a 30-year-old Land Rover, your car wouldn't work. Train systems wouldn't work. Planes definitely wouldn't work. Nothing would function. How would you feed a planet of 8 billion people with no high technology, no capability of making artificial fertilizers? It would be Armageddon. So when you hear when you think of the trillions that are spent on climate change, think that that money could, a tenth of that money could harden the globe's electrical grid. Yeah. So and this will happen. This is it's an inevitability that it will happen. It would literally save human civilization.
When you say it will happen, you mean the whole thing goes out? It will happen.
There will be a solar flare which will hit the Earth.
Of some kind.
Of a major kind, because there's literally evidence that everybody thought the Carrington event was an extreme event, the solar flare that caused it, but I think there was research about a year ago that basically demonstrated that events as much as 10 times as large and impactful had occurred within the historic record.
When's the next one due? Can we in any way project this?
No, it would most likely occur during a solar maxima, which is that the sun has like an 11.5-year cycle of activity, which causes a lot of variation in climate, which the climate fanatics always ignore. And we're actually entering a quiet period now. But say in another 6 years, that would be a risk. Wow. And it would take out, even if it was much smaller, it would take out all satellite communications.
Yeah,
including Starlink.
So there would literally be nothing, unless you got one of those funky generators and 100 of them, I suppose, which might help for a bit, but what would you listen to? Because the people wouldn't be broadcasting in the first place, etc. Just as one example. Simon, it's a fascinating, there's more than a little food for thought on that call. Thank you very much indeed. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. This is Talk. By a fiver in April. Philip Kisley is Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. Philip, good afternoon to you.
Hi Ian, it's great to talk to you.
And nice to have you with us. Now, of course, if they just hide it within general taxation but raise the tax, then it hasn't really gone away, right? I mean, I'm not, the greatest mathematician, but I think that's roughly how it would work.
I think the best thing you can say about that is it's actually got worse. The British taxpayer who doesn't own a television, who never watches or has anything to do with BBC output whatsoever, will be paying for something that he or she doesn't want. And I think it's worse than that. I think the BBC is a public service broadcaster, but it hasn't been a public service broadcaster in practice for a very long time because it isn't impartial. It's completely biased. You can go straight back to Brexit to see just how massively biased it was against the Brexit vote, against Brexiteers, and generally against the white working class. How often do you see a white working class conservative man on the BBC? This isn't me talking, actually, there's the Newswatch, which was the public service broadcast sector watchdog, did some deep, hard research on that and came up with just massive bias against Brexit, not only in news and current affairs, but in entertainment as well. So so-called comedy, for example, was extremely pro-EU and anti-Brexit. But if you look at more recent things, you look at, for example, the Gaza conflict, the anti-Israel, deep, worrying anti-Israel bias is just through the roof, and a very naive dependency on Palestinian figures and research. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And a final example I'll give you as well is the gender stuff. The BBC recently, over the last 2 years, has commissioned two, not one, but two comedy series about drag queens. You know, so this is not a public service broadcast because it doesn't serve the public. It serves a minority, and more to the point, it serves minority interests. And I, for one, don't want to pay tax on that.
Yeah, I don't think that's not an unreasonable position. And I would sort of almost add into that as well that regardless of all of those persuasive arguments that, you know, and there will be some that would counter it or challenge it, but either way, even if everything you've said was taken on board by everybody, then there's still another argument here, and that is the inability to justify this kind of taxable service in the 21st century. And I found myself years ago, you know, I grew up in that era where watching the Generation Game and Starsky and Hutch was a big part of Saturday night. And therefore my view of the BBC became almost muddied by a romantic notion rather than a genuine one. And I think that's sort of how they've survived quite a bit, to be honest, over the years. And in fact, I genuinely, even if I wanted to support the BBC, I couldn't with a straight face sit here, Philip, and find an argument that could justify its existence in its current form.
Yeah, I mean, it pains me to say all of this stuff because, like you, I grew up in that era where, yes, we had a romanticised version of it, but we were looking back to the BBC was a gold standard in broadcasting.
Yeah.
World class. It's not been that for a very, very long time. For Lisa Nandy to come out and say, "Oh well, everybody's got to pay tax on it to fund this monster, to fund this corporation that actively works against the vast majority of British people," is ludicrous. It should be a subscription service. If you want to pay for something that's massively biased, that reinforces all of your prejudices and beliefs, then you pay for it. But I'm certainly not going to.
What do you say when, I mean, on the specifics of bias, I was reading something at the weekend where somebody was challenging the BBC for being pro-Israel, and I did sort of slightly spit out my cornflakes when I read it. But nonetheless, I think they'd mobilised some kind of petition to argue that a particular reporter, whose name escapes me, I think it was maybe an online one, had been too pro-Israel. I mean, how do we square that within the accusation of bias? In the same way that, you know, the Brexit argument would say, well, hang on, the politician that got most airtime during the Brexit debate was Nigel Farage. So that would also be seen as a counter to what you've just said, Philip.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at. They found one. They found a pro-Israel reporter.
Yeah, I did think that as well. I thought, oh, really?
But I think all you have to do is just look at the research. For example, the Sunday Telegraph in the middle of last year said that the BBC had breached its own guidelines 1,500 times in reporting the Gaza conflict, and it also found that deeply worrying pattern of bias against Israel. So it's numbers, it's huge, but also I would say, to the point you've just made, which is a very good point, there is no place for now, unfortunately, for a state broadcaster, because we are bombarded with that kind of misinformation, and the BBC itself is a purveyor of misinformation. We all know when they're talking about fact checkers, they're talking about left-wing fact checkers that are checking left-wing facts, you know. So it's very sad. It gives me no pleasure to say this because, as I say, like you, the BBC was, you know, some of my greatest memories of a child was watching things like Starsky and Hutch and all the rest of it. But it's not fit for purpose anymore. It cannot work. It cannot work in Britain 2025, it just won't happen.
Yeah, and is subscription the only real authentic proposal that we could look at? Because sticking it in, you know, at the moment it's a hypothecated tax, I suppose, but if you were to put it into general taxation, then that doesn't make it any better. We're still paying for something that is fundamentally flawed in its business model. Even if it wasn't biased, it's still flawed. And subscription, I suppose, would be the only thing you could do, unless you were to throw ads on it. And I think that brings in other problems.
Yeah, I think if you're throwing advertising on there, you know, you are fundamentally undermining what the BBC is supposed to do. But you find yourself in just such a ridiculous situation, kind of argue for it anyway, because the BBC itself is undermining what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's really not up to me or you to say, well, the BBC needs to do this, and this. It's up to the BBC and the government. And unfortunately, they seem to be floundering. They can't find a sensible way forward because it's so date, it's so dysfunctional. And for me, the key thing is, I keep coming back to this, it's working against us. It's working against the vast majority of British people who not only turn off from it, but find its content extremely worrying for all of the reasons I've just said. It's supposed to be unbiased. It's supposed to be impartial. It is none of those things. And if you think about, for example, the treatment of the Palestinian stats and all of the research that is coming out there, you know, it's not pushing it, Ian, to say that they're almost supporting Hamas. They're almost supporting a terrorist organization by taking all of that information almost as read and then looking at what Israel says and tearing it to pieces ad nauseum.
Well, at least we got Jeremy Bowen, because he's very impartial, of course. So listen, Philip, that's great to talk. Lovely to have you on. Thank you, Philip Kisley, Senior Fellow at the New Culture Forum. People will argue forever about the bias of different organisations. The BBC, quite rightly, because we pay for it, comes under greater scrutiny, and its entire raison d'etre is that it is not opinion-based unless it does a programme like Question Time where it invites people on to have an opinion. I'll come back to what I said. Regardless of all of that, I don't know genuinely how, and I would love to, by the way, I'd love to stick that romantic hat on again and go, yeah, you know, it's got the, even, you know, Strictly has tried to kind of rejuvenate that sort of romantic, cosy relationship with the BBC. Once in a while, there'll be a bit of a drama on there or a documentary that you think that's quite compelling. But it shouldn't be once in a while. It's an organisation with a massive budget, and it's spread itself too wide in trying to, you know, appeal to everybody and tick every flipping box in the book. If you wanted to be really brutal with the BBC, as a first base, at the very least, what is it, £174.50? Well, what about the BBC said, right, we're going to run it for less than £100. Your budget will still be bigger than most media organisations could dream of. Would you have to get rid of stuff? Yes, you would. Would you keep some stuff? Yeah, well, you'd keep the bits that you could afford that were watchable or, you know, proven to have some kind of benefit or use. But you'd have to look at it and say, well, why are we still... I mean, I think, does BBC 4 still exist? I don't mean the radio, I mean the television thing. But I think BBC 4 is still there. And BBC 3 might well be on iPlayer now only, or is that... So there's all of that stuff to contend with. Then there's a couple of foreign-speaking organisations as well. There's that to contend with. There's local news and radio. Look, I can see the absolute need for that. Some would argue it's actually the greatest justification for the BBC. But there's a lot of waste in there as well. I mean, they've got 6 or is it 7 national radio stations? Well, it's probably more now, because everything in a way is national, because you can listen to the whole thing. With budgets bigger than, you know, some conventional radio. I mean, it's extraordinary. So go through it seriously. And if you went, you know what, we're going to keep BBC One and one radio station, and that's going to be the BBC. You could do it for under 100 quid. People would go, well, OK, still not perfect, but you've started. Or you're going to keep the website and the news, something like that. 0344 499 1000. We'll have more comment from you in a few moments. Jeremy Kyle is going to be here with Drive at 4. We'll speak to him in a few moments as well. Just gone 3:45. This is Talk.
Firefighters.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Stephen says, I've lodged many complaints with the BBC. They always find themselves not guilty. That's probably true. Steve says, question for the programme. If Starmer can stop local council elections in May, can he change the term of the government? Can he say we're not going to have a general election in 4 years' time? They can only go. There is a legal. I mean, the last government, or the coalition, had fixed term parliament, so it had to be 5 years, and then that was changed, so it can be 4 years. But you can't, at the moment, go above a certain. Which I think it is 5. You can't go above 5 years, but you can call it between 4 and 5 or something of that nature. But yeah, I guess could he suddenly go? Yeah, we're going to change that as well. There won't be. I mean, you remember it was during COVID. I know there were no mayoral elections down in London, so Sadiq Khan got I think I'm right. He got an extra year out of it, right? Curious times. Let's go to Chris down in London. How you doing, Chris?
Hi there. Yeah, hi.
Hi, what have you got for us?
Yeah, I just want to talk about the benefits of AI.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, because I've heard a lot of negativity about how we can control it. But from my own example, and I'm only talking about myself only, yeah? My own experiences, yeah?
Sure.
February last year, I had a major health issue. I was absolutely fit for then. I was doing 16 kilometres a day. I was really fit.
Right.
Suddenly, I collapsed. I went to hospitals. I went to doctors. Now, I know everybody's busy. I know everybody's under pressure.
Sure.
Everybody's doing this. Do you know, I understand all that. But when I fed my conditions in, because they didn't diagnose it, but when I fed in my conditions into AI in April 2024, it produced 6 scenarios for my conditions because I listed them as they happened. So I went back.
Was it? Can I just ask, Chris? Was this into Chat GPT or something?
Yeah, GPT.
Okay.
But you have to pay for it, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went into that. Yeah. And being honestly with you, I went into that and I listed down based on how the conditions happened. So what actually happened to me was condition 1, condition 2, condition 3, because it's accumulative. So you get to a condition and it came back with 6 conditions. And number 1, it took the NHS 6 months to diagnose that condition. And it's only because I insisted when I saw a consultant. I said, take this. I brought in the AI output and gave it to the doctors and said, can you have a look at this? They said, well, you're not showing any signs of that. I said, look at it. Seriously, look at it. So they sent me for blood tests. And do you know what? Bang. Number 1 condition that the AI diagnosed was what was actually wrong with me.
Can I ask what that was, Chris?
I won't tell you. It's in neurology.
Okay, all right. So it's a neurological issue.
Yeah.
And the AI response was spot on.
It was spot on. Number 1 condition.
Okay. And when... So when you told the consultant this, the consultant was...
No. What actually happened was I went in and had a chat with the consultant. They said, you're not showing any of those signs.
Yeah.
So what they did, what she decided to do was to do a blood test for me. Yeah?
Yeah.
And which was great because it was kind of like separate from what she was supposed to be doing.
Okay.
Yeah?
So in fairness to the consultant, the consultant went along with your own homework, as it were.
That's all right, but you know, it's not them. They're under so much pressure.
Yeah.
The GPs, the NHS, they're under so much pressure because there's too many people for too little services.
Right.
Be truthful.
So was this something, would you go as far as to say that AI saved your life?
Let me tell you, up until I got diagnosed and got the certain tablets, my mobility was restricted to about 1,000 steps a day, minimum. And getting dressed in the morning was restrictive. It was really hard to get up, to put on my jumper over my head, or to get myself dressed in the morning time, or get undressed in the evening time. It was absolutely debilitating. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I struggled, but I didn't call in the NHS. I didn't ask for any assistance. I just got on with it, but it took me ages to do anything.
Well, yes. And so you, like many of us, you didn't act when you should have acted. But are you in a position now where you are being addressed and treated fully?
We're on the course now. But what I'm saying is, what I would like people to stop back, instead of saying AI is, it's going to kill you, it's not. It might actually save your life.
Well, I think certainly, and listen, it's a great call, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. I wish you a full recovery, if that is possible, for whatever it is you are suffering with. And I can well believe that will become a fairly default way of diagnosing. The problem there, I guess, and Chris's experience worked brilliantly because it was backed up by medicine, is that you may well get people whose question that they put into the system and therefore the response they get back isn't quite as authentic, and that muddies the waters. When you go back to the consultant, well, AI said I've got a leg missing or something. I can sort of see where it can be difficult. However, having said all of that, there is no doubt that the medical world will be, certainly from everything I've read about this, will be one of the chief beneficiaries of artificial intelligence in so many different ways, in the practical sense of how procedures take place, and certainly down to diagnosis and the ability to go deeper than anything that was previously possible. I know that's not going to all happen overnight, but it's certainly the direction of travel. Trace says, none of my family watch the BBC. Utter waste of money, especially when more things need to be streamed and paid for as well nowadays. And Hannah, there should be a quota on the BBC for reporting on national news. Reports on the LA fires is non-stop. If they're funded by UK money, UK interests and news should take precedence. And Triffa says, forget AI, we need to get human intelligence sorted out first. And we're not about to argue with that. Jeremy Kyle is on the other side.
I'm going to be really honest, I don't understand all the A1 stuff.
You don't?
I've been listening and watching. You are super intelligent.
You think?
Yeah, I do, I know.
That's very kind.
How are you?
It's artificial, though.
Yeah, well, you know what I thought AA was, don't you?
Go on.
Artificial insemination. Anyway, back to reality after your highbrow stuff. What's the name of that last person? Triffa?
Triffa, or Trifa. T-R-I-F-A. Triffa.
Triffa. How was your weekend?
It was all right.
I was in here. I went out to a party on Saturday night with my wife, stayed in London, and then what better way to deal with a hangover than to take your 5-year-old to monster trucks at the O2?
Yes.
What horrendous. So, lots of money, tickets, all that, get there, 10 minutes in, he went, it's too loud, I want to go home, even with a headset on.
Seriously?
But honestly, he was more excited about the escalators at News UK than he was
So you
about...
brought him into here?